I truly believed the judge was my father's guaranteed win. Then my attorney leaned in, and I whispered two words I was never supposed to know. The judge's pen froze mid-sentence, and for the first time, my father's smile cracked. Because those two words were not a threat, they were a receipt. My name is Elizabeth Powell. I am 34 years old. The air conditioning in the Civil District Court in New Orleans is humming, a low and mechanical vibration that I can feel in the soles of my feet. It is supposed to keep the humidity out, but nothing keeps the Louisiana damp out completely. It seeps into the wood paneling. It weighs down the flag standing in the corner. It makes my skin feel tacky and cold at the same time. I am standing at the plaintiff's table. My hands are flat against the polished oak surface. I am pressing them down hard because if I lift them, I know they will shake. I am not here to defend a parking ticket. I am not here for a business dispute with a stranger. I am here to sue my father. Across the aisle, Thomas Powell looks impeccable. He is wearing a navy bespoke suit that costs more than the average car in this parish. His silver hair is brushed back, perfectly coiffed, catching the artificial light. He is not looking at me. He is leaning over to whisper something to his attorney, Gavin Rusk, and then he smiles. It is that famous Thomas Powell smile. It is the smile that sold 1 million industrial dishwashers. It is the smile that charmed investors and placated furious chefs. It is the smile that made everyone believe he was the genius behind Crescent Harbor Supply Company. They were wrong. My mother, Mary Ann Powell, was the genius. She was the one who understood that the hospitality industry in the Gulf runs on chaos, and the only way to make money is to be the calm in the center of it. She started the company with a single van and a garage full of high-end linens. She built it into an empire that supplies everything from walk-in freezers to the mints on the pillows for 80% of the hotels in the French Quarter. She was the grit. Thomas was just the gloss. But the grit is gone. My mother died 6 months ago, and the gloss is currently trying to steal everything she built. The bailiff is saying something about rising for the judge, but my mind is pulling me back. It drags me out of this courtroom and back to the reading of the will. It was simple. It was clear. My mother did not trust easily, and she knew Thomas better than anyone. The will stated that ownership of Crescent Harbor Supply Company was to be split down the middle, 50% to Thomas, 50% to me. But the clause that mattered was not the numbers. It was the condition. Joint management, financial transparency, mutual sign-off on any expenditure over $5,000. She wanted to ensure that I would protect the legacy while Thomas remained the face of the brand. She thought she had locked him in with legal ink. She underestimated how much he hated being managed. The slide began the week after the funeral. I walked into the headquarters on Chupitula Street, ready to work. I had grown up in that warehouse. I knew the smell of cardboard and industrial cleanser better than I knew the smell of my own apartment. I walked down the hall toward the executive suite, the place where my mother had spent 18 hours a day for 30 years. The door was open. The nameplate was already gone. Thomas was sitting in her chair. He had not just moved in, he had erased her. Her framed photos of the warehouse expansion were in a box by the door. Her lucky jade plant was in the trash. The walls, which she had painted a soft, calming cream, were being covered with framed articles about Thomas. He looked up when I entered. He did not look like a grieving widower. He looked like a king who had finally ascended to the throne. "Elizabeth," he had said, his voice smooth like bourbon. "You do not need to be here today. Take some time. Go to a spa. I am the co-CEO. Dad," I had replied. The will was probated on Tuesday. He had laughed. It was a light, dismissive sound. "Let the lawyers worry about titles. You are the daughter. I am the father. We know how this works." He did not wait for my agreement. He picked up the phone and started a call, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. That was the first red flag. The second one walked in 3 weeks later. Her name is Kendra Holt. She is sitting in the gallery directly behind my father right now, checking her phone. She is roughly my age. She has blonde extensions and a resume that could be written on a napkin. Before 6 months ago, She was a hostess at a restaurant my father frequented. Now, according to the organizational chart, she is the chief operating officer of a multi-million-dollar logistics company. I remember the day Thomas introduced her. He called an all-hands meeting on the warehouse floor. The drivers were there, men with calloused hands who had worked for my mother for 2 decades. The sales team was there, looking nervous. "This is Kendra," Thomas had announced, his arm draped around her waist. "She is going to bring a fresh perspective to our operations. She is going to streamline us." Streamline. It is a corporate word for disaster. Kendra did not know what a supply chain was. She thought inventory turnover was a gymnastics term. But suddenly, she had an office next to Thomas, and she had the power to approve invoices. That was when the bleeding started. I tried to play by the rules. I requested the weekly financial reports. I was legally entitled to them. Every time I asked, I got excuses. The server was down. The accountant was on leave. The files were corrupted. When I finally forced my way into the system, I saw the ghost transactions. Money was leaving the company in streams. Not rivers, not yet, but steady streams. Payments to vendors I had never heard of. Consulting fees for projects that did not exist. There was a charge for $20,000 for brand revitalization paid to a company that had a PEO box in a strip mall. There was a monthly retainer of $8,000 for a lifestyle consultant. I confronted Thomas in the glass-walled conference room. I slapped the printouts on the table. "What is this?" I demanded. "We are cutting overtime for the drivers, but we are paying $20,000 for a logo redesign that hasn't happened." Thomas did not even look at the paper. "You are obsessing over pennies. Elizabeth, you lack vision." "I lack vision," I asked, my voice rising. "Mom built this on pennies. You are bleeding us dry." "And who is this vendor? Who is verifying these services?" He stood up then. He is a tall man, 6 feet 2 inches, and he knows how to use his height. "You are here because I allow you to be here," he said, his voice dropping to that dangerous, quiet register. "Do not mistake a piece of paper from your mother for actual authority." That was the moment I knew he would burn it all down rather than share it with me, but I still thought it was just greed. I thought it was just an ego trip. I did not know it was criminal. Not until the letter came. It arrived at my apartment, not the office. It was a standard envelope from a regional bank we had done business with for years. I opened it while drinking my morning coffee, expecting a statement or a policy update. It was a notice of default warning, according to the letter. Crescent Harbor Supply Company was behind on interest payments for a term loan of $2 million. I stopped breathing. The cup froze halfway to my mouth. $2 million. We did not have a loan for $2 million. My mother hated debt. She had paid off our line of credit 5 years ago. We were cash positive. We had no reason to borrow that kind of money. I read the letter again. The loan had been taken out 3 months ago. The collateral was the warehouse itself, the entire physical heart of the company. I drove to the bank. I did not call. I did not email. I drove. I sat in the branch manager's office, a man who had known my mother since I was in high school. He looked uncomfortable. "I need to see the loan documents." I said. He hesitated. "Elizabeth, your father said you were aware of the expansion plans. Show me the documents." "Gary." He turned his monitor. He printed the PDF. He slid the paper across the desk. There it was, the loan application, the corporate resolution authorizing the debt, and at the bottom, 2 signatures, Thomas Powell and Elizabeth Powell. I stared at my name. It was looped in blue ink. The E had the specific slant I used. The L's were crossed exactly how I crossed them. It looked perfect. It looked undeniable. But I had never seen this piece of paper in my life. I felt a cold sensation spread from my stomach to my throat. It was the physical sensation of betrayal. My father had not just ignored me. He had not just insulted me. He had become a felon. He had forged my signature to leverage the entire company, risking everything my mother had built, to funnel $2 million into what, that was the question. Where did the $2 million go? I went back to the office records. I dug deeper. The money had hit our account and vanished within 48 hours, transferred to a holding company called Gulfstream Ventures, a company that did not exist in any public registry I could find. I realized then that I had two choices. Choice one, I could stay silent. I could let him keep playing CEO with Kendra. I could let them drain the accounts until the bank foreclosed on the warehouse. The company would die. My mother's name would be forgotten. But I would keep the peace. I would remain the dutiful daughter. Choice two, I could blow it up. I could drag him into the light. I hired Miles Carver the next day. Miles is sitting next to me now. He is not a flashy lawyer. He wears suits that are slightly rumpled. He drives a sedan that is 10 years old, but he has eyes like a hawk, and he hates bullies. When I showed him the loan document, he did not gasp. He just tapped the signature with his pen. "This is a very good forgery," he said, "but it is still a forgery." We filed the suit: breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, embezzlement. We asked for an emergency injunction to remove Thomas from the company pending a forensic audit, and that is why we are here. That is why I am standing in this courtroom, feeling the damp chill in my bones. But as I look at Thomas, I realize something is wrong. He is too calm. He is facing a lawsuit that could send him to prison, and he is checking his watch like he is bored. He is not looking at his notes. He is not looking at the witness list. He is looking at the door to the judge's chambers. He knows something I do not. The bailiff clears his throat. All rise. The Honorable Judge Victor Landry presiding. The door opens. Judge Landry walks in. He is a man in his late 50s, with a receding hairline and a face that looks carved out of granite. He moves with a slow, deliberate weight. He ascends the bench and sits down. He adjusts his glasses. He looks out over the courtroom. His eyes scan the room. They pass over me. They pass over Miles. And then they land on Thomas. For a fraction of a second. Just a heartbeat. Judge Landry's eyes narrow, and he gives a nearly imperceptible nod. Thomas nods back. My stomach drops. It is a physical lurch, like missing a step on a staircase in the dark. I look at Miles, but he is looking down at his papers. He did not see it, but I saw it. That was not the look of a judge assessing a defendant. That was the look of a man acknowledging a partner. I look back at Thomas. He is smiling openly now. He adjusts his cufflinks. He looks at me, and his eyes are dead cold. He mouths two words to me across the aisle. Give up. The realization hits me with the force of a physical blow. We walked in here thinking we had the evidence. We thought we had the truth. We thought the forged signature was the smoking gun. But we are not in a court of law. We are in a theater. The script has already been written. The ending has already been decided. I grip the edge of the table tighter. My knuckles are white. The judge bangs his gavel, the sound cracking through the room like a gunshot. Docket number 4729, Powell versus Powell, the clerk announces. Judge Landry looks at me. Counsel, you may proceed with your opening statement. Make it brief. I have a full docket today. His tone is bored, dismissive. He has already decided that I am a waste of his time. I stand up. My legs feel heavy. I can feel the weight of the forged loan, the stolen legacy, the ghost of my mother watching me. I am walking into a trap. I know it now. But as I look at my father, smug and secure in his purchased safety, a new feeling rises up through the fear. It is hot and sharp. It is the same grit my mother had when she drove that van through hurricanes to deliver supplies. I will not let him win. I will not let him steal her name. I take a breath. I step away from the table. Your Honor. I begin. My voice steady despite the shaking in my hands. This case is about more than a business dispute. It is about the theft of a legacy. Judge Landry sighs loudly. He takes off his glasses and rubs the bridge of his nose. Counsel, spare me the theatrics. Stick to the facts. I freeze. Theatrics, I have spoken 2 sentences. Thomas chuckles softly. I look at the judge. I look at the man who is supposed to be the impartial arbiter of justice. And I see the wall I am up against. It is 50 feet high and made of old money and boys' club secrets. I am Elizabeth Powell. I am 34 years old. And I am about to learn that in this city. The truth does not matter unless you can afford to buy it. But I have something they do not expect. I have nothing left to lose. I look at the judge, and I nod. Yes, Your Honor. The facts. I begin to speak, and the trap snaps shut around me. The confrontation happened exactly 45 minutes after I left the bank. I did not go home to change. I did not call a friend to vent. I marched straight into the executive suite of Crescent Harbor Supply Company. The letter from the bank burning a hole in my leather portfolio. Thomas was in a meeting with 2 suppliers from a refrigeration company in Texas. I did not care. I walked past his administrative assistant, who tried to half stand and block me, and I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors. The conversation inside stopped. Thomas looked up, a coffee cup halfway to his mouth. He did not look guilty. He looked annoyed, the way a parent looks when a toddler interrupts a dinner party. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice dropping into that smooth, condescending register he reserved for an audience. "We are discussing the Q3 expansion. Unless the warehouse is on fire, this can wait." I threw the letter onto the center of the desk. It slid across the polished wood and stopped right next to his hand. "The warehouse is not on fire," I said, my voice shaking just enough to betray my rage. "But it is mortgaged, for $2 million, with a signature that is not mine." The suppliers exchanged awkward glances. One of them started to gather his papers. Thomas did not even blink. He smiled at the men. "Gentlemen, give us 5 minutes." My daughter is very passionate about company finances, but she sometimes misses the nuance of leverage. Nuance, that was his word for fraud. As soon as the door clicked shut behind the suppliers, the smile vanished. Thomas picked up the letter. He did not read it. He just folded it and set it aside, as if it were a takeout menu. "You are being dramatic." "Elizabeth, I am being dramatic." I stared at him, incredulous. "You forged my name. You committed a felony. You put Mom's entire legacy up as collateral for a loan I never authorized. Where is the money?" "Thomas." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the shipping yard. "You talk about legacy like it is a museum piece. Your mother was a wonderful woman, but she was cautious, too cautious. In this market, if you are not growing, you are dying. I made an executive decision to secure capital. You are not the sole executive." I snapped, "We are partners, 50-50. That is what the will says." He turned around, and the look on his face chilled me. It was pity. "The will is a piece of paper. Elizabeth, it was your mother's way of making you feel included. But look at you. You are shaking. You are emotional. You think running a company is about checking boxes and reading spreadsheets. You are a child playing executive in her mother's high heels." I felt the air leave my lungs. A child playing executive. "I am 34 years old. I said quietly, I have an MBA. I ran the logistics division for 5 years before Mom got sick." "And who gave you that division?" He stepped closer, invading my personal space. "Who smoothed over your mistakes? Who charmed the clients when you were too busy burying your nose in compliance reports?" "I did. I have always carried you, Elizabeth, just like I carried Marianne." That was the spark. He could insult me, but he could not rewrite her. "You did not carry her." I hissed. "She built this. You just spent the profits." He laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. "You really believe that mythology? Don't you, Saint Marianne, the self-made woman? Let me tell you the truth. Sweetheart, she was the face. I was the engine. I let her take the credit because it made for a good story. A woman in a man's industry. It sold units. But now that she is gone, we do not need the story anymore. We need leadership, real leadership." He leaned in, his cologne overpowering the room. "So here is what is going to happen. You are going to go home. You are going to take a long sabbatical. You will still get your salary. You will still get your dividends. But you are going to stop waving papers around and let the adults work." I grabbed the letter off the desk. "I am not going anywhere." I said, "And neither is this." I walked out. But I knew I had already lost the room. He had not denied the forgery. He had just reframed it as necessary leadership. He did not care about the law. He cared about control. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched Thomas systematically dismantle my reality. It was not a violent coup. It was a slow, bureaucratic suffocation. It started with the meetings, the weekly operations sync. A standing meeting on the calendar for 10 years suddenly vanished from my outlook. When I showed up to the conference room, it was empty. I found Kendra Holt in the break room, stirring almond milk into her coffee. She was wearing a blazer that looked brand new and expensive. "Where's the ops meeting?" I asked. "Oh," she said, her eyes widening in mock surprise. "Thomas moved it to 7 in the morning at the country club. We figured you would not want to be up that early. You have looked so tired lately." She smiled. It was a weaponized smile. I tried to log into the accounting software to trace the $2 million. Access denied. I called IT. They told me there was a system migration and my clearance level was under review. I confronted the CFO, a man named Marcus who had attended my graduation. He would not meet my eyes. "It is a directive from the CEO. "Elizabeth," he mumbled, shuffling papers. "All executive access now requires dual authentication from Kendra." From Kendra, I almost laughed. She does not know how to read a balance sheet. "Marcus?" Marcus just shrugged. "I have a mortgage. Liz, I am sorry. They were cutting me out of the nervous system of the company. I was still physically there. I still had an office, but I was becoming a ghost." Then came the character assassination. I walked onto the warehouse floor on a Tuesday afternoon. Usually, the guys would wave or stop to chat about the Saints game. This time, they went quiet. I saw heads dip. I saw eyes dart away. I cornered the shift manager, a guy named Roy. "What is going on?" "Roy," I asked, "why is everyone acting like I have a contagious disease?" Roy looked at his steel-toed boots. "Look, Miss Elizabeth, we heard about the breakdown." "The what?" "Your dad, Mr. Powell. He told the shift supervisors that you are having a hard time, that you are unstable. Since your mom passed, he said we should not bother you with work stuff because it might trigger an episode." I felt the blood drain from my face. An episode. He was painting me as a hysteric. He was using my grief, the very real and raw pain of losing my mother, as a strategic asset to delegitimize me. If I got angry, I was proving him right. If I cried, I was proving him right. I went back to my office and closed the door. I sat in the dark for an hour. I realized then that I could not win this from the inside. The company I loved, the company my mother died building, was now a hostile territory. I picked up the phone and called Miles Carver. Miles is not the kind of lawyer you see on billboards. He does not have a slogan. He operates out of a converted townhouse in the Garden District that smells like old paper and lemon polish. When I met him, he was wearing a cardigan and eating a sandwich at his desk. He listened to me for 20 minutes without interrupting. He looked at the will. He looked at the copy of the forged loan document. He looked at the rejection emails from IT. Then he wiped a crumb from his lip and leaned back. "You have a very strong case, Elizabeth," he said. His voice was dry, lacking any of the theatrical flair my father possessed. "The law is boring, mostly, and the boring facts are on your side. The will grants you equal control. The forgery is a criminal act. The lockout is a breach of fiduciary duty." He tapped the desk. "We file a suit to remove him as director. We ask for a forensic audit. We verify the signature is fake. We win. It is simple." It sounded simple. I wanted to believe it was simple. We filed the complaint 3 days later. Thomas's reaction was not simple. It was nuclear. He did not hire a local attorney. He hired Gavin Rusk, a partner at one of the biggest firms in the South. Rusk was a man who specialized in high-stakes corporate divorces and destroying reputations. And they did not just file a defense. They filed a countersuit. I read the document in Miles's office, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the paper. Thomas was accusing me of embezzlement. The suit claimed that I was the one who authorized the loan. It claimed that I had signed the documents, taken the money, and funneled it into offshore accounts to feed a gambling addiction. It claimed that now, realizing the debt was unsustainable, I was claiming forgery to cover my tracks. Gambling addiction, I whispered. I have never bought a lottery ticket in my life, Miles sighed. He took off his glasses and cleaned them on his tie. It does not matter if it is true. Elizabeth, it matters that it creates a narrative. He is muddying the water. He is saying, I am not the crook. She is. It is a classic deflection. But the signature, I said, we can prove I did not sign it. We will. Miles said, we will get a handwriting expert. We will depose the bank manager. We will trace the funds. But this takes time. But Thomas did not want time. 2 days later, we had our scheduling conference with the judge assigned to the case. Judge Victor Landry, usually, in a civil case of this magnitude. The trial date is set 12 to 18 months out. There is discovery. There are depositions. There are motions to dismiss. It is a slow grind. Miles walked into the conference cheerful. We are going to ask for a year. He told me, we need time to subpoena the bank records and get the forensic accountant into the company servers, but inside the judge's chambers. The atmosphere was strange. Gavin Rusk sat there, looking relaxed and sharp. Judge Landry sat behind his desk, reviewing a file. He did not look at us. Your Honor, Gavin said, his voice slick. My client, Mr. Powell, is very concerned about the stability of the company. These accusations by his daughter are damaging the business reputation. We need to resolve this quickly to protect the shareholders and the employees. We request an expedited trial date. Miles objected immediately. Your Honor, that is impossible. The discovery alone will take 6 months. We need access to servers that have been blocked. We need Judge Landry cut him off with a wave of his hand. He did not look up. I agree with Mr. Rusk, the judge said. His voice was flat. A company is at stake. We cannot have this cloud hanging over a major local employer. He flipped open his calendar. We will go to trial in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Miles almost choked. Your Honor, that is prejudicial. We cannot prepare a forensic defense in 6 weeks. We have not even received the bank's internal communications yet. Judge Landry looked up then. His eyes were hard. You are a competent attorney. Mr. Carver, I am sure you can manage. 6 weeks. Discovery closes in 30 days. Do not waste my time with delays. He closed the file. Meeting adjourned. We walked out of the courthouse into the blinding New Orleans sun. Miles looked stunned. He was a man who believed in the system, and the system had just skipped a beat. That is highly unusual, he muttered, checking his notes. 6 weeks. That is a rocket docket. I have never seen Landry move that fast on a commercial dispute. I looked down the steps. Thomas was standing by his car, a sleek black sedan. Kendra was in the passenger seat, applying lipstick in the visor mirror. Thomas saw me. He did not wave. He just tapped his wrist, checking his watch. He did not look like a man who was worried about a trial. He looked like a man who had already read the script. He needed to win fast. That was the key. He did not care about the truth coming out eventually. He needed a judgment now, before the money ran out, before the forensic accountant could find where the $2 million had gone. I turned to Miles. He is rushing us. I said, why? Miles shook his head. Because he thinks he can beat us on the sprint. He thinks we will panic. He thinks you will settle for a payout just to make it stop. No, I said, watching my father's car pull away into traffic. It is not that. He is not gambling on us panicking. I remembered the look on Thomas's face in the office, the absolute, unshakable confidence. He is rushing because he knows exactly what is waiting for him at the finish line. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. The countersuit, the lies, the rumors, they were all just noise. The real weapon was the calendar, and the man holding the calendar was Judge Victor Landry. We had 6 weeks to unravel a crime that my father had spent 6 months burying. And as I stood there on the hot pavement, I realized that in a race between a lie and the truth, the lie usually starts halfway down the track. I looked at Miles. Get the handwriting expert, I said. Get the best one in the state. If we have to do this in 6 weeks, we are not going to sleep. Miles nodded. His jaw set. We will be ready. Elizabeth. But as I looked back at the courthouse, at the stone pillars and the inscription about equal justice under law, I wondered if being ready would be enough. My father was not playing a game of evidence. He was playing a game of access. And I was stuck on the outside. Pounding on the door, the discovery came 3 days before the trial was scheduled to begin. It was not a smoking gun found in a safe, but a photograph found in a newsletter. Miles Carver slid the glossy pamphlet across his desk toward me. It was a copy of The Coastal Angler, a monthly circular distributed at marinas along the Gulf Coast. The issue was dated 2 years ago. On page 4, in a section titled Community Catches, there was a grainy but unmistakable photograph of 4 men standing on the stern of a sport fishing boat. They were holding beer cans and grinning, sunburnt and relaxed. On the far left was my father, Thomas Powell. He was wearing a visor and a polo shirt with the Crescent Harbor logo. Standing right next to him, with an arm draped casually over my father's shoulder, was a man in a bucket hat and sunglasses. "It is him," Miles said, his voice tight. I looked closer. The jawline was softer in the photo, the expression less severe, but it was him, Judge Victor Landry. "They are not just acquaintances, Elizabeth," Miles continued, tapping the photo. "This is the Barataria Anglers Club. It is a closed membership, 12 members total. They spend 3 weekends a year together on a private charter. They eat together, they drink together, they sleep in the same cabin." I felt a surge of hope. This was it. This was the conflict of interest that would force a recusal. "This proves bias." I said, "He cannot preside over a case involving his fishing buddy." We filed the motion for recusal the next morning. I expected outrage. I expected an apology. I expected the system to self-correct. Instead, I got a lecture. We were in Judge Landry's chambers again. The room smelled of cedar and old books. Landry sat behind his desk, holding the motion as if it were a dirty tissue. He looked at Miles over the rim of his glasses. "Mr. Carver," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "New Orleans is a small town. The legal and business communities here are tightly knit. If I were to recuse myself from every case involving someone I have shared a meal or a boat ride with, the docket would grind to a halt. But, Your Honor," Miles argued, keeping his tone respectful but firm, "this is not a casual dinner. This is a long-standing social fraternity. You and the defendant have vacationed together repeatedly. The appearance of impropriety is—" Landry slammed the file shut. The sound echoed in the small room. "I am a jurist of 20 years standing. Mr. Carver, I am perfectly capable of separating my social life from my judicial duties. I resent the implication that my integrity can be bought with a few redfish and a beer." He looked at me then. His eyes were devoid of the warmth I had seen in the fishing photo. "The motion is denied. We proceed on Monday. And counsel, if you bring another frivolous motion to my bench, I will hold you in contempt." That was the moment I realized the room we were walking into was not a courtroom. It was a slaughterhouse. Monday morning arrived with a heavy gray sky. The courtroom was freezing. The air conditioning was blasting so hard I could see the condensation on the metal pitchers of water at the counsel tables. I sat next to Miles. Thomas sat with Gavin Rusk. The gallery was sparsely populated, just a few court observers and, inevitably, Kendra Holt, who sat in the front row typing on her phone with manicured thumbs. When Judge Landry entered, the bailiff cried out, but the ritual felt hollow. Landry took his seat, arranged his robes, and looked at the clock. Opening statements. He said, "Keep them brief." Miles stood up. He had prepared a meticulous timeline. He wanted to tell the story of the company, of the will, of the gradual lockout. He walked to the lectern, his notes organized. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is about a breach of trust. It is about a clear violation of a testamentary will and a fraudulent financial transaction that threatens the solvency of a 30-year-old company." Landry picked up a pen and started writing something. He did not look at Miles. He looked bored. Miles continued, "We will show that the defendant, Thomas Powell, systematically excluded his co-CEO from operations. We will present logs showing blocked email access. We will show that on the date the loan was signed, Elizabeth Powell was not even in the parish. Landry sighed. It was a loud, theatrical sigh. Mr. Carver, he interrupted. We have read the briefs. We know the allegations. Get to the point. Miles faltered for a second. The point, Your Honor, is that the evidence will show a pattern of... Thank you. Mr. Carver, Landry said, waving him off. Mr. Rusk. It had been less than 3 minutes. Miles sat down, his face flushing slightly. Gavin Rusk stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket. He did not look at the judge. He looked at the empty jury box. Performing for an audience that wasn't there, knowing the only audience that mattered was already on his side. Your Honor, he said, his voice smooth and resonant. This is a tragedy, not a corporate tragedy, but a family one. We have here a daughter, Elizabeth, who is grieving the loss of her mother, and in her grief, she has become erratic. She has become paranoid. She was absent from the company for months, leaving her father to shoulder the burden alone. And now, when the company needs decisive leadership, she is lashing out. He turned and pointed a finger at me. We will show that Thomas Powell acted within his rights as the senior executive to save the company. While his daughter was unavailable, I gripped the edge of the table. Unavailable. I had been at the warehouse every day until they locked me out. Landry nodded. He was listening now. He was leaning forward. Proceed, he said softly to Rusk. The bias was not subtle. It was not hidden in complex legal rulings. It was in the body language. It was in the clock management. When Miles called our first witness, the IT director from the company, things went from bad to worse. The IT director, a nervous young man named Jason, took the stand. He looked terrified. He kept glancing at Thomas, who was staring at him with a dead, shark-like gaze. Jason, Miles asked, can you explain why Ms. Powell's email account was deactivated on October 14th? Jason swallowed hard. I received a directive. From whom? Objection, Rusk shouted, barely standing up. Hearsay. It was not hearsay. It was a direct order given to the witness. But Landry nodded immediately. Sustained. Rephrase. Mr. Carver. Miles tried again. Did you personally deactivate the account? Yes. Why? Because I was told that Mr. Powell was on medical leave for mental health reasons. I gasped. Medical leave. Miles stepped forward. Who told you that? Jason, objection, Rusk yelled. Relevance. The internal HR status of the plaintiff is not relevant to the loan document. Sustained, Landry said. Move along, Mr. Carver. Let's get to the financial issues. We are not here to litigate HR gossip. Miles turned to the judge. Your Honor, this goes to the heart of the constructive termination. They invented a mental health crisis to justify locking her out. Landry took off his glasses. Mr. Carver, I have ruled. Move along. I felt a cold sweat prickle my neck. They were erasing my reality in real time. Every time we tried to show the mechanism of the theft, the blocked emails, the canceled meetings, the lies to the staff, Landry cut the line. He claimed he wanted to focus on the hard numbers, but whenever we tried to present the context for those numbers, he shut us down. It was a suffocating feeling. It was like trying to run in water. During the lunch recess, we did not go out. We sat in a small conference room off the hallway. Miles was pacing. He had loosened his tie. He is not letting us build the foundation, Miles said, rubbing his temples. He is boxing us into the signature. He knows if he excludes the pattern of behavior, it becomes a he said, she said about the loan. But we have the signature expert. I said, we have the logs. Miles stopped pacing. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Elizabeth, you need to understand what is happening here. This is not a trial. This is a framing. Rusk is painting a picture of you as an absentee, unstable daughter who probably signed the loan in a fog of grief and forgot about it. And Landry is holding the frame for him. He sat down across from me. "We have to make a record," he said seriously. "We have to get every objection, every overruled piece of evidence, onto the transcript, because we are not going to win in this room. We are playing for the Court of Appeals." "The Court of Appeals," I asked. "How long does that take?" Miles hesitated. 18 months, maybe 2 years. I laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. 2 years. "Miles, the company has a $2 million loan at a variable interest rate. Thomas is draining the cash reserves into shell companies every week. In 2 years, Crescent Harbor Supply will be a shell. There will be nothing left to win." Miles looked down at his hands. "I know. But if Landry rules against us, that is the only legal path." I stared at the wall. The paint was peeling slightly in the corner. "He does not need to win the appeal," I said, realizing the full scope of Thomas's plan. "He just needs to win here. He needs the judgment to validate his control so he can finish stripping the assets. By the time an appellate court looks at this, Thomas will be retired in the Caymans and the company will be bankrupt." Miles did not answer. He knew I was right. We went back into the courtroom for the afternoon session. The atmosphere had shifted. It felt heavier. Rusk called his first witness. It was Kendra Holt. She walked to the stand like she was walking a runway. She took the oath with a bright, earnest smile. "Ms. Holt," Rusk asked, "what is your role at Crescent Harbor?" "I am the chief operating officer," she said. "And how would you describe the plaintiff's involvement in the company over the last 6 months?" She looked at me. Her eyes were wide and feigned concern. It was heartbreaking. "Really, Elizabeth just checked out. We tried to include her. Thomas tried so hard. He would send her documents, invite her to meetings, but she would just not show up, or she would come in and just stare at the wall. We were all very worried about her stability. It was a lie, a total, verifiable lie. I had calendar invites. I had sent emails demanding to be included." Miles stood up for cross-examination. He held up a stack of paper. "Ms. Holt, you say you invited Ms. Powell to meetings. Here's a printout of the Outlook calendar for the last 4 months. Can you show me a single invite sent to Ms. Powell?" Kendra blinked. "Well, we often did it verbally. We are a family company. We don't put everything in Outlook. So there is no record." Miles pressed. Judge Landry cleared his throat. "Mr. Carver, do not badger the witness." She answered the question. "But, Your Honor," Miles said, his voice rising. "She testified they invited her. The server logs show 0 invites. That is perjury." "It is a recollection of events," Landry said smoothly. "The witness stated it was verbal. Move on." I looked at Thomas. He was leaning back in his chair, watching the show. He caught my eye and gave a small shrug, as if to say, "I told you so." They were not just bending the rules, they were breaking them, snapping them over their knees, and tossing them aside. The truth did not matter, because the man in the black robe had decided what the truth was before we even walked in the door. I looked around the courtroom. The wood paneling, the seal of the state on the wall, the flags. It all looked so official, so dignified. But it was just a set. I realized then that Miles was fighting a battle of logic in a room governed by power. He was trying to use a scalpel to fight a man with a sledgehammer. We needed something else. We did not need more paper. We did not need more logs. We needed to break the room itself. Landry looked at the clock again. "We will adjourn for the day," he announced. "Tomorrow, we will hear the handwriting experts. And let me warn both sides. I want this wrapped up by Wednesday. I have a fishing trip, excuse me. A conference on Thursday." He smirked. A tiny, imperceptible smirk. I watched him stand up. I watched the bailiff bow. I sat there while the room emptied, feeling the cold seep into my marrow. Miles was packing his briefcase, muttering about case law and appellate briefs. He was a good lawyer. He was a good man. But he was playing by the rules of a game that had been fixed. I stood up. My legs felt stiff. "We are going to lose." "Miles," I said. He looked up. "We have a shot with the handwriting expert. If we can prove no." I said, "We are going to lose in this room. And if we lose in this room, the company dies." I walked out of the courtroom into the hallway. Thomas and Kendra were standing by the elevator. They were laughing. Thomas was miming a golf swing. They didn't see me, or maybe they did, and I was just so insignificant now that I didn't register. I walked past them, my head high, but inside, I was crumbling. I had walked into the trap, just like Thomas knew I would. I had brought facts to a knife fight, but as I pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the humid New Orleans afternoon, a thought began to form in the back of my mind. It was a dangerous thought. It was the kind of thought my mother would have hated, but the kind of thought my father would have respected. If the judge was bought and the law was twisted, then the only way to win was to stop acting like a plaintiff and start acting like an investigator. I needed to know not just that Landry was corrupt, I needed to know how. I needed the receipt, and I had about 48 hours to find it before he banged that gavel and signed my legacy away. The courtroom air was stagnant, recycled through vents that had probably not been cleaned since the Clinton administration. I sat with my back straight, my hands folded on the table, watching the man who held the fate of my mother's legacy in his trembling hands. Dr. Aris Thorne was the best forensic document examiner in the state. Miles had flown him in from Baton Rouge, paying a retainer that made my stomach turn, but looking at him now, I hoped it was worth it. Thorne was a small man with thick glasses and the demeanor of a high school chemistry teacher who had no patience for class clowns. He sat in the witness box, adjusting a projector that was displaying two images side by side on the wall behind the judge. On the left was the signature from the loan document, the one that had mortgaged Crescent Harbor Supply for $2 million. On the right was a composite of 20 signatures taken from my checks, contracts, and driver's license over the last 5 years. Dr. Thorne, Miles said, standing at the podium. He did not look like a defeated man today. He looked sharp. He felt the weight of the science behind him. Can you explain to the court what we are looking at? Thorne cleared his throat. He used a laser pointer, a red dot dancing on the screen. Certainly. Exhibit A on the left is the questioned signature. Exhibit B on the right is the known standard. To the untrained eye, they appear identical. That is the point of a simulation. It is designed to pass a casual inspection by a bank teller or a clerk. However, under microscopic analysis, the deception falls apart. He clicked a button, and the images zoomed in until the ink lines looked like highways. Look here, at the capital E, Thorne said, and here, at the loop of the L. Do you see the hesitation marks in a genuine signature? The hand moves in a fluid, ballistic motion. It is muscle memory. You do not think about how to write your name, you just write it. The ink flow is consistent. The red dot hovered over a tiny, jagged blotch on the loan signature. But here, Thorne continued, his voice gaining strength, we see what we call pen lifts and tremor of fraud. The writer stopped. They hesitated. They were drawing the signature, not writing it. They were looking at a model and copying it line by line. The pressure is static. The speed is slow. It is, in my professional opinion, a cut-and-paste forgery. Miles looked at the judge. And what is the probability that Elizabeth Powell signed this document herself? Thorne looked over his glasses at me. He did not smile. He was a scientist dealing in absolutes. The probability is statistically 0. The person who signed this document was trying to be Elizabeth Powell, but they failed the biomechanical test. It is a forgery. Miles turned to the defense table. Your witness. I felt a surge of relief so strong it almost made me dizzy. It was done. The science was irrefutable. We had proved the crime. Thomas could charm the room, but he could not charm a microscope. Gavin Rusk stood up. He buttoned his jacket slowly. He did not look worried. He did not look like a lawyer who had just seen his client's case demolished by forensic science. He looked like a man who was about to tell a very interesting story. Dr. Thorne, Rusk began, walking toward the witness box. He did not go to the podium. He walked right up to the rail, invading the expert's space. You stated that the signature lacks fluidity, that it shows signs of hesitation. That is correct, Thorne said stiffly, And you compared this signature to samples taken from Ms. Powell over the last 5 years. Checks, contracts, routine paperwork. Is that right? Yes. Standard comparison protocol. Rusk nodded. He turned to look at me. His eyes were sympathetic, which terrified me more than his anger. Now, Doctor. Thorne, are you aware of the emotional state of the alleged signatory at the time this document was signed? Thorne blinked. I analyze ink on paper. Counselor. Not psychology. Rusk smiled. Let me help you with the context. This document was signed on October 14th. That is exactly 3 weeks after Marianne Powell. The plaintiff's mother and business partner passed away. Miles stood up. Objection. Relevance. Judge Landry waved his hand. I will allow it. It goes to the state of mind. Rusk continued, his voice soft, almost hypnotic. Doctor. Thorne, is it true that extreme emotional distress can affect fine motor skills? Can grief cause a person's hands to shake? Can trauma cause a person to hesitate? To lack that ballistic confidence you spoke of? Thorne hesitated. It is possible. Yes, physical factors can influence handwriting. And what about medication? Rusk asked. If someone were taking sedatives for anxiety or sleeping pills to deal with the loss of a parent, would that affect their signature hypothetically? Yes, it could cause tremors. It could cause inconsistent pressure. Rusk walked back to the table and picked up the loan document. He held it up like a trophy. So, is it possible, Doctor, Thorne, just possible that a grieving daughter, exhausted, medicated, perhaps crying while she sat in her father's office, might sign her name with a little less fluidity than she does when she is signing a rent check on a Tuesday morning? Thorne shifted in his seat. He looked at his charts. He looked at Rusk. It is a possibility within the realm of motor control theory. Thorne admitted. However, the specific characteristics here suggest— Thank you, Doctor, Rusk interrupted, his voice booming now. You said it is possible. That is all we need to know. He turned to the judge. Your Honor, we have a grief-stricken daughter who signed a document to save her mother's company and now, in her anger and confusion, either does not remember doing it or is using a natural variation caused by her trauma to claim fraud. The expert admits that grief and medication can mimic these signs. This is not a forgery. This is a tragedy being weaponized. Rusk sat down. I looked at Judge Landry. I expected him to ask about the specific pen lifts. I expected him to ask about the lack of speed. I expected him to look at the science. Instead, Judge Landry looked at Thomas. Thomas looked back, his face a mask of solemn, paternal concern. Then, Judge Landry nodded. It was a small motion, just a dip of the chin. But it was a gavel bang in silence. It was an acknowledgement. I see the door you opened, and I am walking through it. The expert's testimony, the microscopic analysis, the undeniable physics of the ink, it all evaporated. Rusk had provided the narrative, the crazy daughter, and Landry had accepted it as fact. You may step down. Doctor? Thorne, Landry said. Board. We will break for lunch. 1 hour. I watched Thorne pack up his charts. He looked confused. He knew he had won on the science, but he had lost the room. I walked out of the courtroom in a daze. Miles tried to talk to me. He was saying something about redirecting, about calling a rebuttal witness, but his voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. I need a minute. Miles, I said. I walked out of the courthouse and down the block to a small concrete plaza with a few metal benches. The humidity was oppressive. It was 90% humidity, the kind of air that you wear like a wet coat. I sat down on a bench. I did not eat. I could not swallow. The feeling in my chest was not just fear. It was a heavy, suffocating realization of powerlessness. I had played by the rules. I had hired the expert. I had brought the truth. And my father had just smiled and rewritten reality. He was going to win. He was going to keep the company. He was going to keep the $2 million. And I was going to be branded as the unstable, lying daughter who tried to sue her grieving father. I watched a pigeon peck at a discarded crust of bread. I felt an affinity with the bird, scavenging for scraps in a world of concrete. My phone buzzed in my bag. I ignored it. It was probably Miles asking where I was. Or maybe Kendra sending a fake checking in on you text to add to her evidence file. It buzzed again, and again. I pulled it out. The screen was bright in the overcast light. It was a text message. The number was local, but I did not recognize it. I opened it. Your father is a fraud. I can prove it. Dare to listen, I stared at the words. My heart gave a strange, hard thump against my ribs. I typed back, my fingers trembling slightly. Who is this? The reply came instantly. 3 bubbles appearing and disappearing. Someone who knows where the money went. He is not just stealing from you. He is stealing from the IRS, and he is paying for protection. I froze. This was not a generic troll. Paying for protection? That sounded like Landry. I typed, why tell me now? Because I saw Rusk in court today. I saw the setup. I am tired of carrying his secrets while he buys new boats. Meet me at the Neutral Ground Coffee House on Daniel Street. 7 this evening. Come alone. If I see a lawyer, I walk. I lowered the phone. I looked back at the courthouse. The massive stone building looked like a fortress. Inside, Miles was preparing legal arguments that Landry would ignore. Inside, the system was grinding me down. This text message was a lifeline. Or it was a trap, if I went, and it was a setup if Thomas had someone there to photograph me meeting with a witness. They could claim I was tampering. They could claim I was bribing people. It could destroy what little credibility I had left. But if I did not go, tomorrow would be a repeat of today. Rusk would spin lies. Landry would nod, and I would lose everything. I looked at the message again. Do you dare to listen? I realized I did not have a choice. Caution was for people who were winning. I was drowning. I typed one word. Yes. I stood up. I smoothed my skirt. I walked back toward the courthouse. Miles was waiting for me in the lobby. He looked anxious. Elizabeth, where were you? We need to go over the strategy for the afternoon. We need to attack Rusk's theory about the medication. Do you have medical records we can submit to prove you were not on sedatives? I looked at Miles. He was a good soldier. He was fighting the war on the map he had been given. He did not know the map was fake. I cannot tell him. I thought, if I tell him, he will tell me it is unethical to meet a witness without counsel. He will tell me it is dangerous. He will stop me. I forced a smile. It felt brittle on my face. I am fine. Miles, I just needed some air. Let's go back in. Let's enter the medical records. We walked back into the courtroom. The bailiff called order. Judge Landry swept in, looking refreshed after his lunch. Thomas was already seated, laughing at something Rusk had whispered. He looked at me as I sat down. His eyes were mocking. He thought he had broken me. He thought the girl who ran out at lunch was the girl who would come back defeated. He was wrong. I sat through the afternoon session. I listened to Miles argue about medical history. I watched Landry sustain objection after objection. I watched the walls close in. But I was not listening. My mind was already at a coffee shop on Daniel Street. My mind was on the shadow that had reached out from the dark. When the gavel banged at 4 o'clock, dismissing us for the day, I did not cry. I did not slump. I packed my bag with precise mechanical movements. See you tomorrow, Elizabeth Miles asked, looking concerned. Yes, Miles. See you tomorrow. I walked out of the double doors. I walked past Thomas. I walked out into the cooling evening air. I felt like a person stepping off a cliff, hoping the parachute would open. I was leaving the safety of the law and stepping into the chaos of the truth. I hailed a cab. Daniel Street. I told the driver. The meter started running. The numbers clicked up. But the only number I cared about was one. One witness. One chance. One receipt. I was done playing the victim. Tonight, I was going hunting. The Neutral Ground Coffee House was empty enough to feel lonely but busy enough to offer cover. I shook the rain off my umbrella and stepped inside. The air smelled of roasted beans and damp wool. I scanned the room. There were 3 people. A student with headphones typing on a laptop, an older man reading a newspaper, and a woman in the back corner, sitting with her back to the wall, watching the door. She looked to be in her early 40s. She wore a rain trench that was belted tight, as if she were expecting a storm inside the cafe. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes were darting between me and the street outside. On the table in front of her sat a thick manila envelope. I walked over. My heels clicked on the tile floor, a sound that seemed too loud for the hushed atmosphere. I stopped at her table. "Are you the text message?" I asked. She did not smile. She did not extend a hand. She just nodded at the empty chair opposite her. "Sit down, Elizabeth, and put your phone on the table, face down." I hesitated, then did as she asked. I sat. "Who are you?" I asked. "My name is Renee Voss," she said. Her voice was low, efficient. It was the voice of someone who spent her life organizing chaos into columns and rows. I searched my memory. The name sounded faintly familiar, like a song heard once on a radio years ago. "I know you," I said slowly. "You did the freelance bookkeeping for the warehouse expansion in 2019. She took a sip of black coffee. "I did a lot more than that," she said. "I was the one who set up the shell companies." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "Shell companies, plural. You worked for my father." I said, "I worked for Thomas." She corrected. "There is a difference. Your mother ran the company. Thomas ran the extraction operation." She placed her hand on the envelope. Her fingers were manicured, but the nails were bitten down to the quick. "I was in court today," she said. "I saw Rusk perform. He is good. He made you look like a hysterical child. And I saw Landry nodding along." She leaned in. "You are going to lose, Elizabeth. Unless you stop fighting the loan and start fighting the history." "I don't understand." I said, "The loan is the crime. He forged my signature 3 months ago." Renee shook her head. A small, pitying movement. "The loan is just the desperate end of a very long rope. Thomas has been siphoning money out of Crescent Harbor for 5 years. 5 years, I whispered. "But Mom was alive." Renee's expression hardened. It was a look of distaste, but not directed at me. "Yes, she was. And when she got sick, when she started the chemo, that was when Thomas ramped it up." I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands gripped the edge of the table. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that while your mother was lying in a hospital bed, fighting for her life, your father was sitting in his office creating invoices for consulting services that never happened. He was moving cash into accounts he thought she would never see because she was too busy dying to check the ledger." I felt a wave of nausea. I remembered Thomas at the hospital, holding Mom's hand, bringing her flowers, looking so devastated. The grieving husband. And all the while, he was robbing her blind. "He is a monster." I said, "No," Renee said matter-of-factly. "He is a narcissist with expensive habits. He likes being the big man. He likes the boats, the trips, the respect, and he resented your mother for actually earning the money he spent." She slid the envelope across the table. "Open it." I opened the clasp. I pulled out a stack of papers. They were copies, bank statements, emails, invoices. I flipped through them. My eyes caught familiar names and numbers, but in context that made no sense. Here was an invoice from Apex Strategic Solutions for $12,000 a month. The service description was market analysis. I turned the page. An email from Thomas to Renee, dated 2 years ago. Subject Q3 revenue, body. "The numbers are too high. We need to show a lower profit to justify the freeze on driver bonuses. Move $15,000 to the Apex account before Friday. Make the report look clean." I turned another page. A text message log. "Thomas Marianne is going in for surgery on Tuesday. I will be out of pocket. Ensure the transfer to Gulfstream hits the offshore account by noon." I stared at the date. It was the day of my mother's mastectomy. My vision blurred. I felt hot tears pricking my eyes, but they were tears of rage, not sorrow. He had used her cancer as a cover. He had used her vulnerability as an opportunity. "Why do you have these?" I asked, looking up at Renee. "Why did you keep them?" Renee looked out the window at the rain-slicked street. "Because Thomas is a charming man until he isn't." I knew what I was doing was illegal. I knew I was an accessory to embezzlement, but the money was good, and I have 2 kids in private school. She turned back to me. But I also know Thomas. I saw how he treated vendors he was done with. He destroys them. I knew one day he would need a scapegoat. If the IRS ever came knocking, or if you ever started digging, he would point the finger at the rogue accountant. She tapped the folder. This is my insurance policy. I kept a copy of every illegal order he ever gave me, every fake invoice he asked me to generate. I told myself I would only use it if he came after me. So why give it to me now, I asked. He hasn't come after you yet. Renee's face tightened. Because he called me yesterday. He told me to take a vacation. He offered to pay for a trip to Costa Rica. He said it might be good for me to be out of the country until the trial is over. She let out a short, sharp breath. Thomas does not give gifts. Elizabeth, he pays for silence. And if I am in Costa Rica, I can't defend myself when Rusk accuses me of being the mastermind behind the theft. I am not going to be his fall guy. I am striking first. I looked down at the documents. This was it. This was the map of the theft. Can I use this in court, I asked. Renee nodded. Most of it. The bank records are real. You can subpoena the originals now that you have the account numbers. The emails are admissible. The text messages, Rusk will fight them. Claim they are doctored, but they will rattle him. She paused. But there is a problem. What, Landry? She said. I looked at her. What about him? Renee leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. You think Thomas is just lucky to get a friendly Judge Elizabeth? Look at the invoices. Look at the names of the consulting firms. I looked back at the papers. Apex Strategic Solutions, Bayou Management, Landry Advisory. I froze. I pulled the sheet out. Landry Advisory, a monthly retainer of $5,000. The address was a PIO box in Metairie. Surely this isn't the judge, I asked. That would be too stupid, even for Thomas. It is not the judge directly, Renee said. Thomas is careful, but follow the money. Who owns Landry Advisory? I stared at the paper. There was no owner name listed on the invoice. Renee sat back. I don't know who owns it. Thomas never let me see the incorporation papers for that one. He just told me to cut the checks. But I know this Thomas does not pay consultants who don't deliver, and the only thing he has needed lately is a legal shield. My mind was racing. If Thomas was paying the judge, or someone close to the judge, that changed everything. It wasn't just bias. It was bribery. It was a federal crime. This is why he is rushing the trial, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. He isn't just trying to save the company. He is trying to close the case before anyone looks at his books. Because if they look at the books, they find Landry. Renee nodded. Exactly. He is exposed. He is terrified. That is why he is dangerous right now. A man who steals money is greedy. A man who bribes a judge is desperate. She checked her watch. She stood up. I have to go. I cannot be seen with you. Wait, I said, grabbing the folder. Will you testify? Renee hesitated. She buttoned her trench coat. If you get the subpoena, I will come. I will not lie for him anymore. But you need to be careful. Elizabeth, you are not just fighting your father now. You are fighting the system he bought. She looked at me, and for a second, her professional mask slipped. I saw a woman who was just as trapped as I was. Dirty men always have one weakness, she said. They think everyone has a price. They think they can buy safety. But the thing they fear most is not prison. It is the loss of the mask. Thomas needs to be the great man. If you strip that away, if you show the world he is just a petty thief, he will break. She turned and walked toward the door. She did not look back. I sat there for a long time. The coffee shop was quiet. The student was still typing. The old man was still reading. I looked at the folder. It was heavy. It contained the destruction of my father's image. It contained the proof that my mother's marriage had been a lie. I thought about calling Miles. I reached for my phone. Then I stopped. If I told Miles now, he would want to file a motion. He would want to disclose the evidence to the other side. That was the law. You have to share your discovery. If I gave this to Rusk tomorrow, Thomas would know I had it. He would have time to come up with an excuse. He would say, Landry Advisory was a different Landry. He would shred documents. He would threaten Renee. No, I could not play this by the book. The book was written by people like Judge Landry. I needed to connect the dots myself. I needed to prove who owned Landry Advisory. I needed to find the line that connected the judge's bench to my father's bank account. I paid for my coffee with cash. I tucked the folder under my arm. I walked out into the rain. The city felt different now. It was no longer just a place where I lived. It was a crime scene. I hailed a cab, but I did not go home. "Take me to the library," I said to the driver. "The main branch." The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror. "It is 8 o'clock. Lady, they close in an hour. That is all the time I need," I said. I settled back into the seat. I touched the folder. The paper felt hot against my skin. My father wanted a war. He wanted to crush me with his reputation and his connections. He thought I was just a grieving daughter who would go home and cry. He forgot one thing. I was my mother's daughter, too. And she taught me that if you want to find the truth in a pile of numbers, you don't look at the total. You look at the remainders. I was going to find the remainder, and I was going to use it to burn his house down. The library was closing, and the security guard was tapping his watch with an impatience that mirrored my own internal clock. I printed the last stack of pages, the sound of the machine whirring like a dying engine, and gathered my life into my bag. I did not go home. My apartment felt compromised, a place where paranoia sat on the couch waiting for me. Instead, I drove to the 24-hour diner on Decatur Street. It was a place for tourists seeking beignets and locals seeking anonymity. I took a booth in the back, ordered black coffee, and spread the anatomy of a crime across the laminate table. I started with Judge Victor Landry. On the surface, he was a monument to civic virtue. I scrolled through articles on my laptop, tethered to the diner's spotty Wi-Fi. Jurist of the Year, board member of the Children's Hospital, the iron gavel of the Civil District. His financial disclosures were impeccable. He owned a modest home in Lakeview and drove a 3-year-old sedan. There were no lavish trips to Europe on his credit card statements, no sudden influxes of cash into his known accounts. He was boring. He was safe. But boring men do not buy vacation homes in Bay Street. Lewis on a judge's salary. I remembered the fishing photo Miles had found. The background wasn't open water. It was a dock, a private dock with expensive teak decking. I pulled up the property tax records for Hancock County, Mississippi. I searched for Victor Landry. Nothing. I searched for his wife's name. Nothing. I closed my eyes and thought like Thomas. My father never bought anything in his own name if he could hide it behind a corporate veil. He loved layers. I looked at the fishing photo again, zoomed in on the boat. The name painted on the stern was partially obscured by a cooler, but I could make out the letters PL Bay. Pelican Bay. I went back to the property search. I typed in Pelican Bay. Nothing. I tried variations. Pelican, Bay, Blue Heron. Then I tried the street name where the marina was located. I scrolled through the owners of the waterfront properties. Most were individuals, doctors, lawyers, and then, at number 412, a corporate entity, Gull Wing Holdings, LLC. I copied the name. I went to the Mississippi Secretary of State's business search, Gull Wing Holdings, LLC, registered agent C, Miller, principal address. A suite in a generic office park in Metairie. My heart skipped a beat. That address. I knew that address. I dug into my bag and pulled out the folder Renee had given me. I frantically flipped through the invoices for the shell companies my father used to siphon money. Apex Strategic Solutions. Bayou Management. I found it. Bayou Management listed its registered office at the exact same street address in Metairie, Suite 204. Gullwing Holdings was in Suite 206. They were neighbors, paper neighbors in a building that probably housed 1,000 empty companies. It was a thread. It was thin. It was circumstantial. If I took this to court, Rusk would laugh. He would say it was a coincidence that the judge's vacation home, LLC, and my father's shell company shared a mailbox provider. He would say I was grasping at straws. He would be right. I needed more than a shared address. I needed a transaction. I pushed the property records aside and opened Renee's folder again. I treated it like a crime scene. I read every line, every date, every routing number. I was looking for a ghost. Then I saw it. It was buried in a stack of consulting fees from 8 months ago. A single invoice, plain and unadorned. Vendor Landry Advisory Group. Service Strategic Business Consulting. Amount $68,500. Date February 12th. I stared at the number. $68,500. It was an odd number. Bribery usually likes round numbers. 10,000, 50,000. I looked at the date. February 12th. I opened my laptop and pulled up the court docket for my case. I scrolled back. On February 10th, Miles had filed a motion to freeze the company assets pending the outcome of the dispute. It was our first aggressive move. We thought we had them cornered. On February 14th, 2 days after the check was cut, Judge Landry issued a summary denial of our motion. Citing insufficient cause to disrupt business operations, the timeline clicked into place like a lock tumbling. Motion filed, check written, motion denied. But who was Landry Advisory Group? I went back to the Louisiana Secretary of State search. My fingers were flying across the keys now. Landry Advisory Group, LLC, Officer Evan Landry, address a residential condo in the Warehouse District, Evan Landry. The name rolled around in my head. It was not the judge. The judge's name was Victor. I opened a new tab and searched Evan Landry, New Orleans. A LinkedIn profile popped up. A young man, maybe 32, slick hair, expensive suit, holding a glass of scotch at a gala. His bio read, Principal Consultant, Landry Advisory, specializing in crisis management and strategic navigation. I looked at his face. I knew him. The memory hit me with the smell of stale hotel coffee. 2 years ago, the Omni Hotel, a mandatory leadership and logistics seminar I had attended to get my continuing education credits. There was a guy at the table next to me. He had spent the entire seminar checking his phone and making jokes about how real business happens on the golf course. Not in the classroom. He had handed me a card, Evan Landry. If you ever need to cut through the red tape, give me a call. I had thrown the card away. I thought he was just another nepotism baby trying to hustle. I realized now he wasn't selling advice. He was selling his last name. He was the bagman. The judge could not take money. That would be too risky. But if a company hired his son for consulting, if his son charged $68,500 for a report that was never written, that was just business. It was clean. It was legal. Unless you could prove the quid pro quo. I looked at the invoice again. $68,500. Why that specific amount? I went back to the Bay Street. Lewis Property Records. I looked at the deed history for the vacation home owned by Gull Wing Holdings. The home was purchased on March 1st, 3 weeks after the payment to Evan. The down payment listed on the closing disclosure was exactly $68,000. The extra $500. Probably the closing costs, or maybe Evan kept it for a nice dinner. I sat back in the booth. The diner noise faded away. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I had him. It was a triangle. Thomas pays Evan. Evan pays the down payment for the judge's house. The judge pays Thomas with a favorable ruling. It was elegant. It was insulated, and it was completely corrupt. I looked at the clock. It was 4 a.m. I did not feel tired. I felt a cold. Crystalline clarity. I gathered the papers. I took photos of everything with my phone, uploading them to a cloud drive Miles couldn't access, just in case. I paid my bill and walked out into the pre-dawn darkness of the French Quarter. The air was thick with a smell of river water and yesterday's beer. I went to my office, not the one at the company. I was locked out of that. I went to the small workspace Miles had set up for me in his firm's library. I spent the next 3 hours building a chart. I taped the invoice to the whiteboard. I taped the property deed next to it. I drew a line connecting them. I added the court ruling. I added the photo of Evan Landry. It looked like the wall of a conspiracy theorist, but the math was undeniable. At 7 o'clock, the front door chimed. Miles walked in. He looked terrible. His eyes were red-rimmed, his suit slightly wrinkled. He was carrying a garment bag, probably his court suit, and a box of pastries. He stopped when he saw me. He stopped when he saw the whiteboard. "Elizabeth," he said, putting the coffee down. "Have you been here all night?" I turned around. I felt like I was vibrating on a different frequency than him. "I know why we are losing." "Miles," he sighed. "We know why we are losing. Elizabeth, because Rusk is a shark and Landry is biased. We have been over this. I spent all night drafting a closing argument that focuses on the I am not talking about bias. Miles," I cut him off. "I am talking about ownership." I stepped aside and pointed to the board. "Look at the date," I said. "Look at the check. Look at the house." Miles walked closer. He squinted at the invoice from Landry Advisory. "Who is Evan Landry?" he asked. "The judge's son," I said. "And the down payment on the judge's vacation home in Mississippi matches this invoice almost to the penny. The check cleared 2 days before Landry denied our injunction." Miles went very still. He looked at the invoice. He looked at the deed. He looked at me. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. "It doesn't matter." I said, "It matters a great deal. Elizabeth, if you stole this, I did not steal it. I lied. It was provided by a concerned whistleblower." Miles ran a hand over his face. He looked terrified. "Elizabeth, do you understand what this is? This is not just evidence for a lawsuit. This is a federal indictment. If we accuse a sitting judge of taking bribes through his son, and we are wrong, we will be disbarred. I will be ruined. You will be held in contempt and possibly charged with slander. We are not wrong." I said. I slammed my hand on the table. "Look at the numbers. Miles, $68,500. You don't pay a 29-year-old consultant $68,000 for strategy unless the strategy is buying a verdict." Miles stared at the board for a long time. He was a cautious man. He was a man of procedure, but he was also a man who hated being played. He traced the line from the check to the ruling with his finger. "It fits," he murmured. "It explains everything. The speed of the trial, the refusal to recuse, the way he shut down the forensics. He is not just doing a favor for a friend. He is an employee." He turned to me. His eyes were no longer tired. They were sharp. "We have to file a motion," he said. "We have to present this to the chief judge immediately. We have to stop the trial." "No," I said. He blinked. "What if we file a motion now? Landry will see it before the chief judge does. He will seal it. He will claim the documents are forged. He will delay. He will give Thomas time to cover his tracks. Thomas will produce a fake report showing Evan actually did some work. They will muddy the water." I walked up to him. "We are closing today. Miles, this is our last shot. So what do you want to do?" "I want to ambush him," I said. "I want you to put me on the stand." "You have already testified," he said. "Recall me. Tell the judge there is new evidence regarding the financial solvency of the company. A new debt discovered. He will let me speak because he thinks it proves I'm incompetent." And then I read the invoice into the record. I said, "I connect the dots while the court reporter is typing. Once it is on the record, he can't seal it. He can't hide it. It becomes public." Miles shook his head. "It is incredibly risky. He could hold you in contempt the second you say the name Landry. He could throw you in a cell." "I don't care," I said. I looked at the photo of the house bought with my mother's stolen money. "I don't have a feeling anymore. Miles, I don't have a suspicion. I have an invoice." Miles looked at the board again. He looked at the determination in my eyes. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that the daughter who had walked into his office 6 weeks ago was gone. He straightened his tie. He adjusted his jacket. "If we do this," he said, his voice steadying, "we have to time it perfectly. We cannot lead with it. We have to lull him into thinking he has won. We let Rusk do his victory lap. We let Landry relax. And then, when they think the ink is dry, we strike." He picked up the invoice copy. "Pack the originals. Elizabeth, put them in your bag. Do not let them out of your sight." I nodded. We walked out of the office and into the morning sun. The city looked the same as it always did, streetcars rattling, tourists stumbling, the humidity rising from the pavement, but to me, it looked like a house of cards, and I was bringing the wind. The courtroom was silent, but it was the silence of a tomb, not a sanctuary. The air was thick with the scent of floor wax and impending defeat. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands clasped so tightly that my knuckles were white. I could feel the folder in my bag against my leg. It felt heavy, like a loaded weapon. Gavin Rusk was finishing his closing argument. He did not pace. He did not shout. He stood comfortably in the center of the room, leaning one hand on the jury rail, speaking to Judge Landry as if they were discussing a dinner menu. "Your Honor," Rusk said, his voice dripping with reasonable sympathy. "This case is not about fraud. It is about grief. We have seen the medical history. We have seen the erratic behavior. Elizabeth Powell is a daughter mourning her mother, and in her pain, she has lashed out at the one person left who is trying to protect her inheritance." He turned to look at Thomas. My father sat with his head bowed slightly. The very picture of the weary, benevolent patriarch. "Thomas Powell saved this company," Russ continued. "He secured funding when the market was tight. He made the hard decisions. To punish him for that, to strip him of his control based on a signature that experts admit could be a result of trauma-induced variation, would be a miscarriage of justice. It would destroy a thriving local business to satisfy a family vendetta." Rusk turned back to the judge. "We ask that you dismiss the plaintiff's claims with prejudice and confirm Thomas Powell as the sole executive authority of Crescent Harbor Supply." Judge Landry nodded. It was a slow, satisfied nod. "Thank you, Mr. Rusk," succinct and persuasive. He turned his gaze to us. It was a cold, dismissive look. "Mr. Carver, you have 10 minutes. Do not waste them." Miles stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He looked tired. He knew the score. He knew the verdict had been written before we walked in this morning, but he was a professional. He walked to the podium and placed his notes down. "Your Honor," Miles began, his voice steady, "we have presented a simple case because the facts are simple. The will of Marianne Powell is clear. It demands equal control. The forensic evidence regarding the loan document is clear. The signature is a forgery. The diversion of funds to shell companies is clear. It is theft." Landry picked up a pen and started tapping it on the bench. Tap, tap, tap. It was a rhythm designed to break concentration. Miles ignored it. "The defendant asks you to ignore the science of handwriting analysis in favor of a psychological narrative that has no basis in fact. He asks you to ignore the $2 million of debt secured against the company assets without the plaintiff's consent." Miles paused. He looked at Landry. He took a breath. "But more than that, Your Honor, we are troubled by the procedural irregularities in this case, the rush to trial, the exclusion of relevant financial history, the unusual weight given to speculative testimony over forensic science." The tapping stopped. Landry slowly lowered the pen. His face darkened. The veins in his neck stood out against his collar. "Are you implying something, Mr. Carver?" Landry asked. His voice was low, dangerous. Miles held his ground, but I saw his hand tremble slightly on the podium. "I am stating that the speed of these proceedings has prejudiced my client's ability to present a full defense of her property rights." Landry leaned forward. "You are treading on thin ice, Counselor. If you are suggesting that this court is biased, you had better have something more than complaints about the calendar. Otherwise, I will hold you in contempt and sanction you for impugning the integrity of the bench." The room went deadly still. Rusk was smirking. Thomas was watching with gleaming eyes. This was the moment they wanted. They wanted Miles to fold. They wanted him to apologize, to retreat, to accept the loss. Miles opened his mouth. I knew what he was going to say. He was going to apologize. He was going to withdraw the comment. He was going to play it safe to save his license. I could not let him do it. I leaned forward. I reached out and grabbed the sleeve of Miles's jacket. He stopped. He looked down at me, confused. I pulled him closer. The courtroom watched. I did not care. I put my mouth to his ear. I whispered 2 words. Landry Advisory. Miles stiffened. His eyes widened. He looked at me, searching my face. I nodded. A single, sharp motion. Use it. He stood up straight. He looked at the judge. The fear was gone from his face, replaced by a strange, calm resolve. He looked at the invoice I had slid onto the top of his papers. "Your Honor," Miles said. His voice was different now. It was harder. "I am not suggesting bias based on the calendar. I am suggesting that there is new information regarding the financial records that requires immediate clarification." Landry slammed his hand on the desk. "Discovery is closed. Mr. Carver, you cannot introduce new evidence in a closing argument. Sit down." Miles did not sit down. "This is not new evidence, Your Honor. It is a clarification of Exhibit C, the General Ledger of Crescent Harbor Supply, which is already in evidence, specifically, a line item that was previously identified only as consulting fees." Landry hesitated. He glanced at Rusk. Rusk looked confused. He shrugged. "Make your point," Landry snapped, "and make it fast." Miles turned to me. "With the court's permission, I would like Ms. Powell to identify the specific transaction, as she has the financial expertise to explain the discrepancy." Landry waved his hand impatiently. "Fine. Ms. Powell, stand up. Tell us what is so important about a consulting fee." I stood up. My legs felt like lead, but my head was clear. I picked up the piece of paper. I did not look at Thomas. I looked directly at Judge Victor Landry. "Your Honor," I said. My voice echoed in the silent room. "On February 12th of this year, a check was issued from the Crescent Harbor operating account in the amount of $68,500. So what Landry said. Companies pay consultants. The vendor is listed as Landry Advisory Group." I continued. The judge's face did not change, but his hand froze on the file he was holding. I continued, reading from the notes I had written on the back of the invoice. "We have discovered that Landry Advisory Group is a limited liability company registered to an Evan Landry." The silence in the room changed. It went from tense to vacuum-sealed. The air seemed to be sucked out of the space. "Evan Landry," I said, enunciating every syllable, "is a principal consultant who lists his address at a condominium in the warehouse district. On March 1st, exactly 18 days after this company received $68,500 from my father, a corporation known as Gull Wing Holdings purchased a waterfront property in Bay Street. Lewis, I saw Rusk stand up. He was moving in slow motion. "Objection," he shouted. "This is irrelevant." I did not stop. I raised my voice over his. The down payment on that property was exactly $68,000, and the registered agent for Gull Wing Holdings shares a physical address with my father's shell company, Bayou Management. Landry's face had gone pale. Not white, but a sickly grayish color. He looked at the court reporter, whose fingers were flying across the steno machine. "Stop," Landry barked. The reporter stopped typing. Her hands hovered over the keys. Rusk was standing in the aisle, looking from Thomas to the judge. Thomas was not moving. He was staring at me. His mouth was slightly open. The smile was gone. For the first time in my life, I saw my father look truly, deeply afraid. Landry cleared his throat. It was a wet, ragged sound. "Counsel, approach the bench. Now." Miles walked to the bench. Rusk ran to join him. I stood alone at the table. I could feel the eyes of everyone in the gallery on me. Kendra had stopped texting. She was staring at me with her mouth open. I could hear the urgent whispers at the bench. "This is outrageous." Rusk was hissing. "This is slander. She is accusing the court of—" "Shut up, Gavin," Landry whispered. His voice was shaking. Landry looked at me over the shoulder of the lawyers. His eyes were wide. He looked like a man who had just heard the click of a landmine under his foot. He turned back to the reporter. "We are going off the record," he said. He turned to the room. "This court will recess for an indefinite period to review the admissibility of these claims. Everyone is to clear the courtroom, immediately." He stood up and practically ran through the door to his chambers. He did not bang the gavel. He just fled. The bailiff looked confused. "All rise," he asked uncertainly. Pandemonium broke out. Rusk was shoving papers into his briefcase. Miles walked back to me. He was sweating. But he was grinning like a wolf. "You did it," he whispered. "You put it on the record before he could stop you." I looked at the court reporter. She was ripping the paper tape from her machine. It was there. It was typed. It was real. We walked out into the hallway. The marble corridor felt cooler than before. Thomas was waiting for me. He was standing by the water fountain. Rusk was whispering frantically into his phone a few feet away. But Thomas was just standing there. I stopped. Miles stepped in front of me. But I put a hand on his arm. "It is okay." "Miles." I walked up to my father. He looked older. The lights in the hallway were harsh, and they showed the lines around his eyes, the sag of his jaw. "You think you won," he said. His voice was a hiss, low and venomous. I did not answer. "You stupid girl," he said, stepping closer. "You did not just hurt me. You destroyed the company. You think the bank is going to keep that loan open now? You think the vendors are going to ship to us when the FBI raids the office?" He jabbed a finger at my chest. "I built that roof over your head, and you just burned the whole house down." I looked at his finger. I looked at his face. I remembered the text message about my mother's surgery. I remembered the forged signature. I did not burn it down. "Thomas," I said, "I just turned on the lights. If the house burns, it is because you filled it with gasoline." He stared at me. He looked like he wanted to hit me, but he couldn't. Not here, not anymore. Rusk grabbed his arm. "Thomas, we have to go. Now." Thomas pulled his arm away. He gave me one last look, a look of pure, distilled hatred, and walked away. I watched him go. I felt a vibration in my hand. My phone. I pulled it out. It was a text from the unknown number. Renee. I looked at the screen. My breath caught in my throat. I heard what happened. "You only found the one for the house. That was just the beginning." A second text bubbled up. I checked the archives again. There are 7 more payments to Landry Advisory over the last 3 years, totaling $400,000, and 2 payments to a Rusk Consulting. I stared at the screen. $400,000. And Rusk. Gavin Rusk was in on it too. This was not just a bribe. This was a payroll. I looked up at Miles. "It is not over," I said. He looked at me. What I showed him the phone. "Renee says there are 7 more payments, and Russ got paid too." Miles went pale. "RICO," he whispered. "Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act." He looked down the hall where Thomas and Rusk had disappeared. "This just stopped being a civil lawsuit. Elizabeth, this is now a federal criminal conspiracy." I looked at the phone. I looked at the empty hallway. "Good," I said. "Let them all burn." The gavel did not bang this time. It was set down gently, almost apologetically, as if the wood itself were fragile. "I declare a mistrial," Judge Landry said. His voice was stripped of its usual baritone authority. It sounded thin, like paper tearing. "I am recusing myself from this matter effective immediately. The case will be reassigned to the division duty judge for rescheduling. All records regarding the anomalies raised by the plaintiff are to be sealed, pending an investigation by the Judiciary Commission." He stood up and walked out. He did not look at the gallery. He did not look at his friend Thomas. He walked quickly, his black robe billowing behind him like a dark cloud retreating from a storm front. I sat there, feeling the adrenaline crash. A mistrial. It was not a win. It was a reset button. It meant the last 6 weeks of testimony. The experts, the stress, it was all washed away. We were back to square one, but the look on Thomas's face told me we were not back to square one. We were in a new world. He was staring at the empty bench, his face a mask of purple rage. Rusk was packing his briefcase with frantic, jerky movements, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. We walked out of the courthouse into a swarm of reporters. The news had leaked. The words bribery and consulting fees were already circulating on Twitter. I kept my head down. Miles fielded the questions with a grim, "No comment," and we pushed through to his car. The silence in the car was heavy. "He is not done," Miles said, loosening his tie as he merged onto Poydras Street. "Landry is finished. He will be lucky if he keeps his pension. But Thomas is cornered. And a cornered rat does not surrender. It bites. He was right. The bite came 3 hours later. I was in my apartment, staring at the wall, trying to process the fact that I had just accused a judge of a felony in open court. My phone rang. It was not a blocked number. It was Thomas. I stared at the screen. My instinct was to let it go to voicemail. My mother would have let it go to voicemail. She would have avoided the conflict. I picked it up. "What do you want?" I asked. There was a pause. I could hear the clink of ice against glass. He was drinking. "You made a mess." "Elizabeth," he said. His voice was slurred. "Just slightly. A mess. Do you know the bank called me 10 minutes ago? They are talking about accelerating the loan. They read the blogs. They know about the signature dispute." "Good," I said. "Maybe they will finally ask who actually signed it." He laughed. It was a dark, wet sound. "You think this ends with Landry? You think you can just burn down my network and walk away with the keys to the kingdom I built this town? I have friends you haven't even met yet." I am hanging up. "Thomas, wait." The tone changed. It shifted from threatening to transactional. It was the voice he used when he was closing a deal with a difficult supplier. "I have a proposal. We stop this. We stop the bleeding. The judiciary investigation will take months. The new trial won't be set for a year. The company cannot survive a year of limbo." I listened. I wanted to hear the price. "I will give you 25%, he said. 25% equity, and a seat on the board. You drop the suit. You issue a statement saying the invoice was a misunderstanding. A clerical error regarding a different vendor. We sweep Landry under the rug. I stay CEO. You get a nice dividend check every quarter, and you go live your life. 25%. I repeated. I could feel the heat rising in my neck. "And maybe 30, he added quickly. "If you sign a non-disparagement agreement." I gripped the phone. "The will says 50. Thomas, 50%. And it says joint control. It does not say 25% and silence." He sighed. "The will is a fantasy. Elizabeth, I am offering you reality. If you keep going, I will spend every dollar in the company accounts on legal fees. I will sue you for defamation. I will sue Miles for malicious prosecution. I will bury you in so much paper you won't be able to breathe. By the time you win, if you win, you will own 50% of a crater." I thought about the warehouse. I thought about the drivers. I thought about my mother's office, painted that soft cream color. "You are right." I said, "The company might die." I heard him exhale, a sound of relief. He thought he had me. "But," I continued, my voice dropping to a whisper, "I would rather see it ash in the wind than see it in your hands for one more day. I don't want a payout. Thomas, I want justice." I hung up. The war started the next morning. The Times-Picayune ran the headline, "Judicial Misconduct Probe Local CEO, Linked to Payments to Judge's Son." It was devastating. The article laid out everything: the shell companies, the dates, the house in Bay Street, Lewis. It was the kind of story that destroys reputations overnight. Thomas responded with a scorched earth campaign that made his previous moves look like child's play. By noon, I was served with 3 separate lawsuits, one for defamation, one for tortious interference with business relations, and one accusing me of stealing proprietary data, the evidence Renee had given me. But the real attack was on the company itself. Thomas froze the accounts. He issued a directive to the bank to lock all outgoing payments unless signed by him personally. He stopped paying the vendors. He stopped paying the rent on the warehouse. He was holding the company hostage. He was saying, "If I can't drive the car, I'm slashing the tires." I sat in Miles's office, looking at the stack of new lawsuits. "He is trying to starve us out," Miles said. "He knows we can't fight a multi-front war without money, and he knows the vendors will walk if they don't get paid in 30 days. I stood up. I walked to the window. "He thinks he is the only one who knows how to play business," I said. "He thinks I am just an operations girl. He thinks I just move boxes." I turned back to Miles. "Get the incorporation papers for the new entity we discussed." Miles looked confused. "The what? Mariner Ridge Capital?" I said. Miles blinked. "Elizabeth, that is a shell. It doesn't have any assets. Not yet, I said. But it will. I spent the next 48 hours doing something I had not done since my mother died. I stopped being a victim of the legal system and started being a CEO. I called the old guard, the 3 senior managers who had been with my mother since the garage days. They had been marginalized by Kendra, pushed into corners, silenced. I met them at a diner in Metairie. Roy, the warehouse foreman, Sarah, the head of logistics, and Ben, the old accountant who had been replaced by Renee. They looked tired. They looked scared. I need you to listen to me. I told them. Thomas is trying to sink the ship to kill the captain. He's going to default on the supplier contracts. What do we do? Miss Liz Roy asked. We can't work if we don't have inventory. I slid a binder across the table. We are going to move the contracts, I said. I explained the plan. It was risky. It was aggressive. It bordered on the very edge of corporate warfare. I had set up a new entity, Mariner Ridge Capital. I was using my own savings, everything I had inherited from my grandmother, every cent I had saved to fund it. I want you to call our top 5 suppliers. I said to Sarah, the ones Mom had personal relationships with. Tell them the situation. Tell them Crescent Harbor is in a liquidity crisis caused by litigation. Tell them Mariner Ridge is willing to purchase their receivables at 90 cents on the dollar, guaranteeing them immediate payment, in exchange for them pausing any breach of contract lawsuits against Crescent Harbor. Ben looked at the numbers. You are buying the company's debt, he said, his eyes widening. Exactly. I said, I am becoming the creditor. If I owned the debt, Thomas couldn't use the bank to squeeze me. If I owned the debt, I could force a restructuring. I could neutralize the default leverage he was using. But if you lose the main case, Ben warned, you lose your savings. You lose everything. I looked at Ben. I looked at the coffee stains on the table. I have already lost the only thing that mattered. Ben, I lost my mother. This is just money. They agreed. They went to work. By Friday. The tide began to turn. The suppliers, terrified of Thomas's instability and the news of the bribery, were relieved to have a lifeline. They signed with Mariner Ridge. I drained my savings account to 0, but I secured the supply chain. Thomas found out on Monday. I heard about it from a text message, but it wasn't from a friend. It was late. I was still at Miles's office, reviewing the debt purchase agreements. My phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. Kendra Holt. I froze. I had not spoken to her since the deposition where she lied about the meetings. I opened the message. He is screaming. He threw a stapler at the wall. He knows about Mariner Ridge. I stared at the words. Why was she telling me this? A second message appeared. He told Rusk to draft a statement. He is going to say I was the one who authorized the payments to Landry. He is going to say I managed the accounts and he was unaware of the vendor details. My breath caught. Of course, the classic Thomas Powell move. When the ship sinks, throw the woman overboard to lighten the load. He was going to frame Kendra. He was going to claim he was just the visionary CEO, too busy to look at the checks, and that his ambitious, younger COO had made the illegal deals to impress him. I typed back slowly. Why are you telling me? The typing bubbles danced for a long time, because I am not going to prison for him. I have the emails. Elizabeth, the ones he thinks I deleted. I have the drafts where he told me exactly how to structure the payments to Evan Landry. I felt a surge of triumph, sharp and cold. I want to talk, she wrote. I showed the phone to Miles. He read it and let out a long, low whistle, the mistress flipping on the master. He said, It is Shakespearean. It is better than Shakespeare. I said, It is evidence. We set up a meeting, not in a dark alley this time, in Miles's office, with a court reporter. We were going to do this by the book. Kendra arrived wearing sunglasses and a hoodie. She looked smaller than she had in court. The arrogance was gone. She looked like what she was, a woman who had been used by a powerful man and was just realizing that her value had expired. She sat down. She placed a flash drive on the desk. It is all there, she said. Her voice was trembling. The audio files. He records his calls. Elizabeth, did you know that he is paranoid? He records everyone. She looked at me. Her eyes were red. He recorded the call with the judge, the one where they agreed on the price. I stopped breathing. A recording, not just an invoice, a voice. "You have the tape?" I asked. She nodded. "I made a copy when he was passed out drunk last week. I knew he was going to turn on me. I saw how he treated you." She pushed the drive toward me. "I want immunity," she said. "I will testify. I will tell the jury everything, but I want to walk away." Miles looked at me. It was a deal with the devil. She was complicit. She had helped him steal, but she was also the nail in the coffin. "We can't grant immunity," Miles said. "Only the district attorney can do that, but we can present this to the DA. If you cooperate, they will likely cut a deal." Kendra looked at me. She was waiting for me to scream at her, to blame her. I looked at her and felt nothing but pity. She had sold her soul for a title and a man who saw her as an expendable asset. "Do it," I said to Miles. "Call the DA." The next week was a blur of motion. The new judge was assigned Judge Elaine Sutter. She was known as the Scalpel. She was precise, cold, and utterly intolerant of nonsense. When she reviewed the file, she did not rush. She read every page. She read the mistrial transcript. She read the affidavit from Kendra. She set a hearing for a new trial date. We walked into the courtroom. Thomas was there. He looked haggard. His suit hung loosely on his frame. Rusk was there, but he looked like a man who was looking for the exit. Judge Sutter sat on the bench. She looked at Thomas. "Mr. Powell," she said. Her voice was crisp. "In light of the ongoing criminal investigation and the evidence regarding the previous mistrial, I am granting the plaintiff's motion for a forensic audit of all company accounts, effective immediately." She turned to Rusk. "And Mr. Rusk, I see your name on several subpoenas regarding payments from the company. You are hereby removed as counsel of record due to a conflict of interest. Mr. Powell will need to find new representation." Thomas stood up. He looked small. The giant who had dominated the room 6 weeks ago was shrinking before my eyes. "But, Your Honor," he stammered, "the company my daughter, she is trying to destroy it." Judge Sutter looked at him over her glasses. "It appears, Mr. Powell, that the destruction came from inside the house." She banged the gavel. "Trial set for 3 months from today." I walked out of the courtroom. The air outside was hot, but I felt cool. Thomas tried to stop me on the steps. He was alone. Rusk had abandoned him. Kendra was gone. "Elizabeth," he said. His voice was pleading now. "We can fix this. We can still settle." I stopped. I turned to look at him. I looked at the man who had forged my name, the man who had bribed a judge, the man who had tried to gaslight me into believing I was insane. "I don't want a settlement, Thomas," I said. I adjusted my bag on my shoulder. "I want the truth, and for the first time in 6 months, I think I'm going to get it." I walked away. I had the debt. I had the witness. I had the evidence. He wanted me to be silent. He wanted me to be the good daughter. Instead, I was going to be the executioner. Judge Elaine Sutter did not look like a woman who enjoyed fishing trips. She looked like a woman who enjoyed silence and the brutal application of logic. Her courtroom was not a club. It was an operating theater. The air was cold. The lighting was harsh. And there was absolutely no room for the kind of charming maneuvering my father had used to survive for 30 years. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my spine pressed against the hard wood of the chair. Miles was organizing his files with a calm precision that he had lacked in Landry's courtroom. We were not fighting uphill anymore. We were fighting on level ground, and that made all the difference. Thomas sat across the aisle. He looked diminished, without Gavin Rusk's slick theatrics and Judge Landry's protective nod. My father looked like what he was, an aging man in a suit that was slightly too large. Trying to hide the tremor in his hands, his new attorney, a man named Sterling who had been hired 3 weeks ago, looked nervous. He was shuffling papers and avoiding eye contact with Judge Sutter. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Sutter took the bench. She did not smile. She did not waste time with pleasantries. She opened the file, adjusted her reading glasses, and looked at the attorneys. "I have reviewed the transcripts from the previous proceedings," she said. Her voice was dry and sharp. like the rustle of autumn leaves. I am aware of the allegations of judicial misconduct regarding the previous judge. Let me be very clear. That circus ends today. In this room, we deal in evidence. If you have it, show it. If you do not, sit down. She looked directly at Sterling. Do we understand each other? Counselor, yes, Your Honor. Sterling squeaked. Miles stood up. He did not need to shout. The acoustics of the room carried his voice perfectly. Your Honor, the plaintiff's case is simple. We have a valid will granting 50% ownership and joint control to Elizabeth Powell. We have a loan document forged by the defendant to secure debt against the company without the plaintiff's consent. And we have a forensic audit showing a pattern of embezzlement totaling over $400,000 paid to sham consulting firms, including one owned by the son of the previous presiding judge. He placed a stack of binders on the bench. These are the bank records. These are the handwriting analysis reports. These are the articles of incorporation for the shell companies. Sterling stood up. He tried to puff out his chest, channeling a confidence he clearly did not feel. Your Honor, this is a vindictive narrative constructed by a daughter who felt neglected. Ms. Powell is lashing out because of her grief. We believe the audit is biased, and the Judge Sutter cut him off without even looking up from the binder. Mr. Sterling, she said, is there a medical diagnosis in this file stating that grief causes a person to hallucinate bank transfers? Sterling froze. No, Your Honor, but then spare me the adjectives. Sutter said, address the numbers. Did Thomas Powell transfer $68,500 to Landry Advisory, or did he not? Sterling sat down. He had no answer. We called Renee Voss. Renee walked to the stand with her head high. She was not the terrified woman in the coffee shop anymore. She was a professional who had decided to burn the bridge while she was still standing on it. Ms. Voss, Miles asked, you served as the external accountant for Crescent Harbor Supply, I did. Renee said, can you explain the nature of the payments to Landry Advisory and Apex Strategic Solutions? Renee looked at Thomas. She did not blink. They were extraction vehicles, she said calmly. Thomas Powell directed me to set up these vendors. There were no services rendered. The invoices were generated internally by me, on his instructions, to move profit out of the company and into accounts he controlled. Sterling jumped up. Objection. She is admitting to fraud. She is an unreliable witness. Judge Sutter looked at Sterling. She is admitting to being a co-conspirator. Counselor. That usually makes a witness more reliable, not less. She knows where the bodies are buried because she helped dig the holes. Overruled, Renee continued. She walked the court through the system. The timing of the transfers, the fake email chains created to justify the expenses. It was a masterclass in white-collar theft. By the time she stepped down, the air in the room felt heavy with the weight of my father's guilt. Then came the turn. Call Kendra Holt, Miles said. The doors opened. Kendra walked in. She was wearing a simple gray suit, her hair pulled back. She did not look at me. She did not look at Thomas. She walked to the witness stand like she was walking to an execution. Thomas leaned forward. His face was a mix of confusion and desperation. He had convinced himself that she would not flip. He thought he still owned her loyalty because he had bought her a lease on a luxury car. Ms. Holt, Miles said. You were the chief operating officer appointed by the defendant. Yes, she said. Her voice was quiet. Did you have knowledge of the loan application with the bank? The one purportedly signed by Elizabeth Powell? Yes. Miles walked to the projection screen. He pulled up an email. It was dated 2 days before the loan was signed. Can you read this email? Sent from Thomas Powell to you. Kendra took a deep breath. She leaned into the microphone. The email says, the bank needs the paperwork by Friday. Elizabeth is not answering her phone. If she won't sign it, make it look like she did. We cannot lose this liquidity. The courtroom gasped. It was not a loud sound, but a collective intake of breath. It was the smoking gun. It was a direct instruction to commit forgery. Thomas slammed his hand on the table. She is lying, he shouted. He stood up, his face red. She edited that. She is trying to save herself. Sit down, mister. Powell. Judge Sutter's voice cracked like a whip. One more outburst, and I will have you removed. Thomas sat down slowly. He looked at Kendra. The look in his eyes was not anger anymore. It was shock. The shock of a man who realizes that the tools he used to break others have finally been used to break him. Sterling looked defeated. He whispered something to Thomas. Thomas shook his head violently. He reached into his briefcase. "Your Honor," Sterling said, his voice trembling. "We have a piece of evidence that has just come to light. It changes the context of the plaintiff's claims regarding the will." Judge Sutter raised an eyebrow. "Discovery is closed. Mr. Sterling, you know that. This is a testamentary document, Your Honor," Sterling said. "It was found in Mr. Powell's safe yesterday. It is a codicil to the will of Marianne Powell." Miles looked at me. I frowned. A codicil. An amendment. Judge Sutter hesitated. "Bring it here." Sterling walked the document to the bench. He handed a copy to Miles. I looked at it over Miles's shoulder. It was a single sheet of paper. It looked old. The date at the top was 3 weeks before my mother died. The text was brief. I, Marianne Powell, being of sound mind, do hereby amend my last will and testament. Recognizing that my daughter Elizabeth is not yet ready for the burden of leadership, I grant full executive control and 75% ownership to my husband, Thomas Powell, until such time as he deems her capable. It was signed. The signature looked like my mother's, weak, shaky, but hers. Thomas was smiling now, a small, desperate smile. "Your Honor," Sterling said, "this document proves that Mr. Powell was acting in accordance with his late wife's wishes. He did not steal the company. It was given to him." The room went silent. If this was real, the lawsuit was dead. If this was real, everything I had fought for, the forgery, the bribery, it didn't matter. He had the authority. Miles looked at the paper. He looked at the signature. He looked worried. "Your Honor," Miles said, "we have never seen this. This is a surprise ambush." Judge Sutter looked at the document. "It is highly irregular that this is appearing now, months after probate closed. It was misplaced in the grief." Sterling lied smoothly. I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach. He was doing it again. He was rewriting her. He was putting words in her mouth that she never said. But my mother knew him. She knew him better than I did. I reached into my bag. I pulled out a small, sealed plastic envelope. Inside was a letter on blue stationery. "Your Honor," I said, standing up. Judge Sutter looked at me. "Yes." "Ms. Powell, if my father is presenting a document from my mother, I would like to present one as well." I walked to the bench. I handed the blue letter to the judge. "My mother gave me this the day before she went into the hospice unit," I said. "She told me to keep it in a safe deposit box." She said, "Thomas loves money more than he loves the truth. If I die, he will try to change the story." Judge Sutter opened the letter. She read it silently. Then she looked at Thomas. "The letter warns of exactly this." Sutter said, "It explicitly states that she has signed no other documents and that any changes to her will appearing after her incapacitation should be considered fraudulent." Thomas scoffed. "That letter could be faked just as easily." Miles stepped in. "We have a forensic document examiner on standby, Your Honor, the same expert who analyzed the loan signature. We can date the ink." Judge Sutter nodded. "We will recess for 2 hours. The expert will examine the codicil immediately." The 2 hours felt like 2 years. I sat in the hallway, staring at the floor tiles. Thomas sat on a bench on the other side, staring at the ceiling. We did not speak. We were two ghosts haunting the same graveyard. When we returned, Dr. Thorne was back on the stand. He looked angry. He had been insulted by Rusk in the last trial, and now he was ready to vindicate his science. "Dr. Thorne," Miles asked, "did you examine the codicil presented by the defense?" "I did," Thorne said. "And what did you find?" Thorne held up the document. He pointed to the bottom corner. "This paper stock," he said. "It is a standard 20-pound bond. If you hold it to the light, You can see a faint batch code from the manufacturer. He clicked a remote. An image appeared on the screen, a microscopic view of the paper fibers and a tiny, laser-printed code. I contacted the manufacturer. Thorne said, "This specific batch of paper, identified by the code X94, was produced in a factory in Georgia on January 10th of this year." He lowered the remote. "Marianne Powell died in September of last year. Unless she came back from the grave to buy paper at Office Depot 4 months after her funeral, she could not have signed this document." The courtroom erupted. It was not a gasp this time. It was a murmur of shock and disgust. Thomas sank into his chair. He looked like he had been punched in the stomach. He had not just lost. He had been caught in a lie so clumsy, so desperate, that it stripped away the last shred of his dignity. Judge Sutter banged the gavel, loudly. "Order," she shouted. She looked at Thomas. Her eyes were hard as flint. "Mr. Powell, you have presented a forged legal document to this court. That is perjury. That is fraud upon the court." She turned to Sterling. "Counsel, I suggest you advise your client of his rights against self-incrimination, because I am referring this matter to the district attorney immediately." Sterling had his head in his hands. He knew his career was likely over just for being associated with this. Judge Sutter looked at the clock. "I have heard enough. I will take the evening to finalize my ruling on the ownership of the company and the damages. Court is adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow for the verdict." She stood up and left. I walked out of the courtroom. I should have felt triumphant. I had proven the fraud. I had proven the forgery. I had proven the fake codicil. But as I walked out into the cooling evening, I felt a strange unease. Thomas had not looked at me when he left. He had not screamed. He had not threatened. He had just walked out, checking his phone. He looked like a man who had one move left. I went to Miles's office. We ordered takeout and started drafting the proposed judgment order. We were celebrating. Miles was opening a bottle of wine. "We won." "Elizabeth," he said, pouring a glass, "it is over. Tomorrow she gives you the company." I took the glass, but I didn't drink. "Is it?" I asked. Thomas is not a man who accepts defeat. He is a man who flips the board. My phone rang. It was 10 o'clock at night. I looked at the screen. It was not Thomas. It was Ben, the old accountant I had put in charge of the Mariner Ridge strategy. I answered. "Ben." "What is it, Miss Liz?" Ben's voice was breathless. He was panicking. "You need to get to the computer. Now. What is happening?" "The bank." Ben said. "I just got an alert on the Mariner Ridge portal. The primary operating account of Crescent Harbor Supply is being flagged." "Flagged for what?" "For a default trigger." Ben said, "Someone is manually activating the change of control clause in the original loan agreement, the one we bought. I don't understand." I said, my hand gripping the phone, "Mariner Ridge owns the debt. We control the default." "Yes," Ben said, "but the bank's automated system still processes the clearance. Someone is using the CEO's credentials, Thomas's credentials, to file a formal notice of insolvency. He is telling the system the company is bankrupt." I felt the blood freeze in my veins. "If he declares insolvency," I whispered, "the assets freeze automatically. The inventory gets locked. The trucks stop running. It is worse," Ben said. "If the insolvency is filed before midnight, the automated sweep kicks in. It liquidates the cash reserves to pay off the secured creditors. Since Mariner Ridge is the creditor, the money comes to you eventually. But the company hits zero balance tonight. He is killing it." I said, I realized what Thomas was doing. He knew he was going to lose the verdict tomorrow. He knew Sutter was going to hand me the keys. So he was making sure that when I turned the key, the engine would explode. He was emptying the accounts. He was firing the kill shot. "Ben, can you stop it?" "I can't," Ben shouted. "I am the creditor, not the debtor. Only the CEO can cancel an insolvency notice." I looked at the clock. It was 10:15. Thomas was doing this right now. He was probably sitting in his study, pouring a scotch, and clicking the buttons that would erase 30 years of my mother's work. I hung up the phone. Miles looked at me. "What is it?" "He is burning the house. I said. "He is triggering the default. The company will be dead by morning." I grabbed my coat. "Where are you going?" Miles asked. "You can't go to him." "It is dangerous. I have to—" "Miles, the court is closed. The police won't understand corporate finance in time to stop a wire transfer." I ran to the door. I am the only one who can stop him. I ran out into the night. I jumped into my car and drove toward the Garden District, toward the house where I grew up, toward the man who was willing to destroy everything rather than let me win. The verdict was tomorrow, but the real trial was happening tonight. The morning sun hit the steps of the Civil District Court with a blinding intensity, but I felt none of the warmth. I walked into the building with the sensation of walking onto a battlefield where the bodies had already been counted, but the generals refused to stop shooting. Thomas was already inside. He stood by the defense table, leaning heavily on the back of his chair. He did not look like a man facing a verdict. He looked like a man who had already pulled the pin on a grenade and was just waiting for the explosion. He saw me enter, and for a fleeting second, a smirk ghosted across his lips. It was a terrifying expression. It was the look of a captain who would rather scuttle the ship than let anyone else sail it. He thought he had won the war of attrition. He thought the insolvency notice he had filed late last night had triggered the automatic liquidation of the company's cash reserves. He believed that even if Judge Sutter handed me the gavel today, I would be inheriting a hollow corpse, a company with no cash, frozen inventory, and a reputation in ashes. He did not know what I had done in the dark. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Elaine Sutter swept into the room. She moved with a kinetic energy that signaled she was done with delays. She sat down, opened the file, and looked at the attorneys. "We are here to render a verdict on the ownership and management of Crescent Harbor Supply," Judge Sutter began. "However, before I deliver my ruling, I understand there was a significant filing made in the early hours of this morning regarding the solvency of the company." Sterling, my father's new attorney, stood up. He looked pale, likely because Thomas had not told him about the kill switch until it was too late to stop it. "Yes, Your Honor," Sterling stammered. "It is my understanding that the defendant, acting in his capacity as CEO, filed a notice of insolvency due to a default on the primary debt facility. As such, under the terms of the loan, the assets are effectively frozen pending liquidation." Thomas straightened his tie. He looked at me. His eyes said, "Checkmate." Judge Sutter looked at Miles. "Mr. Carver, do you have a response to this development?" Miles stood up. He picked up a document that was still warm from the printer. "We do, Your Honor." He walked to the bench and handed the paper to the judge, then dropped a copy on the defense table. "It is true that Mr. Powell attempted to trigger the default clause at 10:30 last night," Miles said, his voice calm and carrying to every corner of the room. "However, he failed to realize that the debt is no longer held by the original bank. It was purchased last week by Mariner Ridge Capital." Sterling looked confused. He picked up the paper, and Miles continued, turning to look directly at Thomas. "As the sole director of Mariner Ridge Capital, Elizabeth Powell executed a waiver of default at 11:55 last night. The creditor has formally waived the insolvency trigger. The notice filed by the defendant is null and void. The company is solvent. The cash is safe." Thomas froze. The smirk vanished, replaced by a look of absolute, shattering comprehension. He had tried to blow up the building, but I had cut the wire 5 minutes before the timer hit 0. Judge Sutter read the document. A small, tight smile appeared on her face. "It appears, Mr. Powell, that your attempt to sabotage the company on your way out the door has failed." She closed the folder and folded her hands. "Now, to the verdict." The room went silent. The air conditioning hummed. A low drone that sounded like the heartbeat of the building, based on the forensic evidence presented. Specifically, the expert testimony regarding the forged loan documents and the fraudulent codicil to the will. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff. Elizabeth Powell, on all counts. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 6 months. The court hereby orders the immediate removal of Thomas Powell from all executive and director positions at Crescent Harbor Supply Company, Judge Sutter announced. Her voice was iron. Full ownership and operational control are awarded to Elizabeth Powell. Effective this second. Thomas slumped into his chair. He looked small. He looked old. Furthermore, Sutter continued, her eyes locking onto Thomas, this court is ordering a full forensic audit of the company's finances dating back 5 years. Any funds found to be misappropriated are to be subject to immediate clawback from the defendant's personal assets. She picked up a separate file. And finally, regarding the forged codicil presented to this court yesterday, I am referring this matter, along with the evidence of the forged loan signature and the bribery allegations regarding the former judge, to the district attorney's office. This is no longer just a civil dispute. It is a criminal matter. She banged the gavel. The sound was like a gunshot. Court is adjourned. Marshals, please escort Mr. Powell from the building to ensure he does not contact any company employees. 2 uniformed marshals stepped forward. They walked toward the defense table. Thomas stood up. He did not look at them. He looked at me. I stood at my table, clutching the edge of the wood. I did not look away. I watched him as the reality of his life collapsed around him. The great man of New Orleans logistics, the charmer, the king of the warehouse district, was being escorted out like a common trespasser. We walked out into the hallway. The press was there. A wall of cameras and microphones. They were shouting questions about Judge Landry, about the bribery ring, about the forgery. Thomas stopped near the elevators. The marshals waited, giving him a moment of dignity he did not deserve. He turned to me. The anger was gone. In its place was a pathetic, wheedling desperation. "Elizabeth," he said. His voice was rough. "You won. You got the company. You got the money." I looked at him. It was never about the money. "Thomas, call off the DA," he whispered, leaning in so the reporters wouldn't hear. "I am your father. You can't let them put me in prison. I am 65 years old. If I go in there, I die in there." He reached out a hand, as if to touch my arm. "Let's make a deal," he said. "I will sign everything over. I will go away. Just tell them you don't want to press charges." I looked at his hand. It was the same hand that had held mine when I was a child. It was the same hand that had forged my signature to steal my inheritance. It was the same hand that had signed the checks to bribe a judge. I remembered the blue letter in my safe. I remembered my mother's voice. Weak and fierce, in those final days, I looked him in the eye. "Mom told me you would try this," I said. "She told me that when the walls closed in, you would try to buy your way out." She said, "Do not let him buy your silence, Elizabeth, because if you do, you are selling your soul." I stepped back. "I am not calling them off. Thomas, you broke the law. You betrayed Mom. You betrayed me. Now you have to pay the bill." I turned to the marshals. "He is all yours." I walked away. I heard him calling my name, but I did not look back. I walked through the heavy double doors and out into the sunlight. The weeks that followed were a blur of vindication and reconstruction. The investigation into Landry Advisory did not stop with my father. Once the invoice I found was made public, the thread began to unravel the entire sweater. The FBI raided Evan Landry's condo. They found records not just of payments from Thomas, but from 6 other major businesses in the city, construction firms, waste management companies, real estate developers. It was a pay-to-play network. You hired the son. You got the ruling from the father. Judge Victor Landry resigned in disgrace 2 days before he was indicted. The sheer scale of the corruption shook the city to its core. The friendly judge was exposed as a wholesale merchant of injustice. Thomas was indicted on 12 counts, including forgery, wire fraud, perjury, and conspiracy to commit bribery. His assets were frozen. His boat, his car, his country club membership, everything was seized to pay for the restitution. The friends he had bragged about, the network he said would crush me. They vanished. The moment the indictment came down, Thomas Powell became a pariah. He was left alone in a rented apartment, waiting for a trial that everyone knew he would lose. Kendra Holt kept her word. She met with the prosecutors and handed over everything: the audio recordings, the deleted emails, the receipts. She did it to save herself. Yes, but in doing so, she provided the final nails for Thomas's coffin. She moved back to Ohio a month later. I never spoke to her again, but the real work was at the warehouse. I walked back into the Crescent Harbor Supply building 3 days after the verdict. The mood was tentative. The employees were scared. They didn't know if the company was going to survive. I called an all-hands meeting on the loading dock. I stood on a pallet, looking out at the sea of faces: drivers, packers, sales reps. I saw Roy, the foreman, standing in the back with his arms crossed. I saw Sarah, the logistics manager, looking hopeful. "I am not going to lie to you," I said. My voice echoed off the metal walls. "We have been through hell. The accounts were drained. The reputation was damaged. But we are still standing." I pointed to the banner hanging from the rafters, my mother's original slogan: service, integrity, speed. Thomas took down that banner. I said, "Today, we put it back up." I announced the promotions immediately. Roy was made VP of Operations. Sarah was promoted to Chief Logistics Officer. Ben was brought back as CFO to clean up the mess Renee had left. "We are going to be transparent," I told them. "We are going to pay our vendors on time. We are going to treat our drivers with respect. And we are going to build this company back. Not with flash and mirrors, but with grit." The applause started slowly, then built into a roar. It was the sound of people who had been holding their breath for a year finally exhaling. 6 months later, I sat in the executive office. I had repainted the walls. The shrine to Thomas was gone. The cream color my mother loved was back. On the desk sat a framed photo of her, and next to it, the blue letter: the company was profitable again. It was hard work. We had lost some customers who didn't want the drama, but we gained new ones who respected the fact that we had cleaned house. I looked at the invoice from Landry Advisory that I had framed and hung on the wall behind the door. It was a strange thing to keep, a receipt for a bribe, but I kept it there as a reminder. I thought about the 2 words I had whispered to Miles in that suffocating courtroom. Landry Advisory. 2 words. They weren't a magic spell. They weren't a threat of violence. They were just a name, a label for a transaction. My father and Judge Landry had relied on the polite silence of the world. They relied on the fact that people don't like to ask awkward questions about where the money goes. They relied on the fact that consulting fees sounds better than bribes. But the moment I whispered those words, the moment I gave the corruption a name, their power evaporated. I swiveled my chair and looked out the window at the busy shipping yard. The trucks were moving. The life of the company was flowing again. I had learned the most important lesson of my life. Evil does not fear the law, because the law can be bought. Evil fears the sunlight. It fears the specific, boring, undeniable detail of a receipt. I touched the photo of my mother. "We did it. Mom," I whispered, "we didn't just survive. We won, and we did it without selling a single piece of our souls." Thank you so much for listening to this story of justice and resilience. It has been a journey, and I hope Elizabeth's fight gave you as much satisfaction as it gave me to share it. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a busy city, a quiet countryside, or maybe during your commute? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'd love to say hello. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Kate Revenge Stories. Hit that like button to support the work, and smash the hype button so this video can reach more people who need to see the bad guys get what they deserve. See you in the next story.